There was a heavy downpour outside the window. Madame looked at the young lady and said that the period was 6 months. Madame told the young lady that she must kill her husband within this period. Madame was furious and asked the lady why she wasn't answering. She said that didn't mean she couldn't do it right now. The woman asked if she knew how much money went into her family. If she wants her brother to be knighted, then she must be obedient. The young lady was confused. She did not understand where she was and did not understand why the woman was screaming. A moment later, her head began to hurt violently. She remembered her brother, who said that she should help the family. Madame looked at her with a grin. Madame told the girl to keep her mouth shut for the rest of her life. Killian Diroth was the stepmother of her husband, whom she had recently married. Madame asked the girl if she really thought that she would become a real duchess. Alice was shocked that her mother-in-law was ordering her son to be killed. She did not understand what was happening. Alice asked Madame for forgiveness and said that she was very nervous and therefore made a mistake. Madame looked at her and said that she was not a duchess, so she needed to remember that. She looked at her and said that the Duke should not live to see the 6th month. Alice bowed obediently. Madame said with a grin that it was their first night, so the young lady needed to take care of her husband. The young lady was in shock. She did not understand what kind of memories were overwhelming her and what a strange situation it was. She looked at her hands and decided to go and look in the mirror. She was surprised and didn't understand if it was really her. She understood that it was still wonderful, but she also understood that now was not the time for this. It was shocked because it knew it wasn't the real her. She was a kitchen helper, but unfortunately she wasn't very good at her job chef. But still, she worked with all her heart. One day, while working part-time, an incident happened. All she last saw was a huge fire from a gas explosion. She wondered if she was dead. She decided to check it out, and pulling her cheek, felt unbearable pain. She understood that, in the end, she was no longer the same as before, a completely different person named Alice. The good news was that she had all the memories of this body. Alice was a noblewoman, but not rich. Finding herself sandwiched between her brother and her sick younger sister, she had to live her life yielding to them and enduring everything. She was married off as if she had been sold to the ducal family. The young lady remembered where she could have heard about Alice. She understood that everything was wrong, and she needed to be more serious. A moment later, she still remembered. In a past life, she read a novel with exactly this content. The story is about a wife who tries to kill her husband on the orders of her mother-in-law. She was a minor character who did not stay long in the novel. The young lady was still surprised, and it seemed incredible to her that she had become a character in a novel. Although she understood that this was the best death, she was still amazed by the crazy mother-in-law who wanted to kill her son. She heard that her husband was lying unconscious in the hospital bed like a living corpse. A moment later, she finally looked in and saw a handsome young man. The young lady was shocked, as she did not expect this. She looked at the young man with embarrassment, as he seemed very handsome to her. She was in shock, and 6 months had passed since he lost consciousness. She wondered why he was so perfectly preserved. Alice looked at her husband confusedly, wondering if his chest was hard. She was a little shocked out of herself because she understood that he was still a sick person. She remembered her stepmother. She knew that he was not her biological son, but still the stepmother tried to get rid of someone who was already dying. Alice knew that as a wife, she had to do this. She was shocked and wondered why he needed a wife who was supposed to kill him. Sitting on the bed, she remembered what happened to Alice in the novel. A moment later, she remembered and was horrified, as Alice was hanged for attempting to poison her husband. The young lady was in shock, wondering if she would have the same end. She thought it was just a dream, and she needed to wake up. Alice understood that she had already died, and the second time was not so terrible. She looked at him intently and saw a handsome Grim Reaper in front of her. She was shocked and asked God how he could subject her to such a test. No matter how much she thought, she still couldn't figure out how to survive. Turning to her husband, she said with annoyance that he was very handsome and would soon die, and she would be hanged. She didn't know if he woke up, whether she would be able to survive. Then she didn't know what to do. She ran in the dark and wondered where she was. A moment later she saw the light and rushed towards it. But suddenly someone grabbed her. The man quietly whispered in her ear that she would not run away. The young lady woke up in a cold sweat. She was in shock, did not understand what kind of dream it was like in reality. She looked at her husband in surprise and saw that her hand was lying on his chest. She was shocked and screamed that she was completely crazy. She was still obsessed, and he still slept soundly. The husband she should kill, Clayless Diroth. Although he was now unconscious from his stepmother's poison, he was an outstanding young duke. As a result, he never opened his eyes until his death. She looked at him intently and wondered what it would be like to lie there and wait for her demise. A moment later she was pulled out of her thoughts by a maid who asked the lady if she was awake. The maid came in and said that her name was Maris, and she had come to serve her. She brought water for washing. Alice understood that it was the stepmother who sent the maid to keep an eye on her. The maid called the young mistress. Maris looked at the young lady and said that she had brought water for washing. Maris looked at her with contempt because she did not want to serve her properly. She was waiting for the Duchess to get angry, and she would report everything to the mistress. Alice looked at the maid with a smile. Maris was surprised. She did not expect such a reaction. A moment later, the young lady took it into the water and brought it to the nightstand. Alice didn't know what she could do about it. In her past life, she often encountered abuse of power and bowling. Maris stared at the Duchess. Alice washed her face and thanked Maris for the good water. Maris was shocked and very angry. Maris looked at the Duchess and said that since she had finished, she needed to change clothes, since Madame was waiting for her. A moment later, Maris informed the madam that the young mistress had arrived. Madame said she could come in. Upon entering, Alice saw her mother-in-law. She was surprised because the shine amazed her. For a moment she was taken aback as she had been staring too much. She understood that she needed to quickly say hello. Alice greeted her mother with a smile and asked if she slept well. Madame said that the greetings were enough and told Alice to sit down. Madame looked at the maid and asked where the doctor was. Alice was surprised and did not understand why a doctor was needed. A moment later, Madame was informed that Dr. Helkin had arrived. The doctor entered the room and greeted Madame. Alice was shocked because she remembered this doctor, a brilliant physician well versed in poisons. It was he who created the poison, which is odorless and tasteless for Madame. Madame said he was late. The doctor asked for forgiveness, as he needed to dispose of some sausages with poison. He looked at the young mistress in surprise and asked if she would really work with him. A moment later, he said with a smile that he was very glad to meet them, and said that his name was Dr. Kilkin Spence. Alice understood that he was just a dog madam. Perhaps this was a good chance for her. She wished him a good job with a smile. Madame looked at the doctor and asked if Duke would die in 3 months if he was given poison. The doctor said that's exactly how it is. He said that if you drink a small amount of such poison, then over time the organs will begin to rot. No traces will remain. Alice was shocked. She couldn't understand how someone could be so cruel to a person. Madame said that the poison that made the Duke fall asleep was truly incredible. She said that this time he created a very useful poison. The doctor looked at Madame and said that he was grateful for her praise. Madame, with a smile on her face, asked if it hurts the body, if it rots before. Helkin said that there would be no pain, since the Duke was in a state of deep sleep. Alice was shocked by this. Madame sighed heavily and said that 3 months was too fast. Madame said that her son would soon turn 16. His Majesty also approved the succession of the title. Killian said that her son is still young, and relatives may be drawn to the inheritance. The doctor said that given the young master's age, he would be able to inherit the title. He said that she told him to prepare sleeping pills. Madame said that for now, the duchy would be under her control, and when her son came of age, he would become a duke. and even the vassals would not be able to say anything. The doctor said that if the proportions are calculated correctly, sleep can last up to 6 months. The doctor looked at Alice and said that all that was needed was to control the amount of poison that was given to the Duke. Alice said with a smile that she was careful she would calculate the dosage. Mistress said that she was very glad that Alice understood everything. The maid told Madame that her son sent her a letter. Killian said that she was very worried about how he was doing at the academy. Alice was shocked because she noticed that Madame was like a different person after the letter from her son arrived. Alice looked at the doctor and said that she would like to discuss everything with him about what should not be said in such a place. Maris remembered Alice, who I told her that they were discussing important details, so they needed to wait outside. Alice noticed that in the doctor's laboratory, the sound insulation was at the highest level. She looked closely at the doctor and frowned. The doctor looked at her and said with a smile that he would like to tell her about the dosages he talked about earlier. The young lady looked at the doctor and called him. She said that he was 35 and a very good doctor. Looking at the doctor, Alice asked if his hobby was creating various poisons from plants. The doctor looked at her in surprise and asked what she was talking about. She smiled and said that she knew a lot about him. She smiled and said that he was the one the madam brought, so she studied every last detail of his file. He said with a smile that he had nothing to hide, but if she treated him badly, Madame would punish her. Alice smiled and said that she knew very well that Madame was merciless, and she also knew that he had reached out to the Duke's property. The doctor looked at her in surprise and puzzlement and asked what she was talking about. He said with rage that she was just trying to slander him. Alice pointed her finger at the shelf with books. The doctor looked at her in surprise. She said that he could call someone and move that shelf away. She asked if he was now sure that she was right. He shouted, puzzled, that she should not do anything. She said with a smile that it was very good that he understood everything. He came closer to her, grabbing her hand. He told her not to do this. How did she know about this? Everything was very simple. She learned about it from reading a book. In the space behind this shelving, there are rare food-molded plants collected by the doctor personally. The price of each plant is equal to the price of the mansion. The doctor secretly stole the relics of the duchy and used them to make poison. She understood that judging by his reaction, he was still a bad guy, but it was better to use him now, like a worm that fell for the bait. Alice asked, with a smile, what would happen to him when she told everything Madam. The doctor was taken aback because he knew what fate awaited him. He would be doomed to death and his head would be cut off. Alice told him not to worry, as she was not going to kill him. She just wanted to make a deal with him. The doctor looked at her dumbfounded and asked what kind of deal she wanted. The young lady said she only wanted one. The butler looked at the young lady and called her. He looked at her and said that he was told that today she was in charge of the Duke's medicine. The butler was the only vassal who remained in the duchy. The lady pretended that she was trying to help the Duke in every possible way, but she simply gave medicine that had no effect. The butler was later removed from the Duke. Alice smiled and said that everything was right, and now she would be responsible for the medicine. And that was an order, Madam. The butler said that in that case, he would give her medicine. Alice smiled and told him not to worry. Since the doctor had already given the medicine to her, the butler looked warily at the young lady. Alice said that he could go. Alice slowly approached her husband. She understood that she must definitely do this. She looked at her husband and said that she was very sorry, but still she also wanted to survive. Maris burst into the room without knocking. Alice asked what happened. Maris said that Madame ordered her to ensure that the young lady performed her duties well. Maris looked at the young lady and told her to begin. Alice understood that it was for the best. If Marisa could see everything with her own eyes, then Madame would not doubt her. Alice slowly raised her husband's head and gave him the medicine. Alice looked at the maid and asked if she could see that Alice had completed everything. Maris glared at the young lady. Alice said that since she was no longer at work, she would like to rest. A little. Maris said that she could rest there. She came closer to her husband and told him not to worry, since what she gave him was not poison. The doctor looked at Alice in surprise and said that it was impossible to make an antidote. Alice looked at him and asked with a grin if it would be better to call someone to move the wall. The doctor, puzzled, said that he was not lying, and the poison that he drank, the Duke, was not subject to either the antidote or divine power. Alice looked at him in surprise and asked if this meant that the Duke would not be able to wake up. The doctor said that everything was correct, and if he was not poisoned, he would still remain in this state for a year. Alice understood that if he was given poison, he would die faster. She looked at the doctor and said that they intended to poison him. The doctor looked at her in surprise and asked why she didn't want to. She said that today he should prepare something that would resemble poison, since she intended to deceive Madame. The doctor prepared her a nutritional supplement. The lady looked at her husband and said that she was trying to save him. He was young and talented, and she did not want him to die because of the cruelty of his stepmother. She said, puzzled that he was still beautiful, but was still shocked that his life was so short. She understood that if she left him like this, he would leave this world in a year. Even if she disappeared from the duchy, Madame would not calm down. Madame will harm the Duke by any means, as nothing will stop her. She was a little puzzled because she couldn't do anything for him at all. Sighing heavily, she realized that she shouldn't pay too much attention to it. She noticed that his hand had fallen. Alice came closer to him and corrected everything. A moment later, she saw a very serious wound on his arm. She was shocked by what she saw. Alice was furious as she noticed that the grana was rotting. She was in shock as he had been poisoned, and such wounds had also been neglected. She understood that she could not save his life, but at least she could heal early. Touching his hand, she saw a glow. The young lady was shocked by what she had just seen, wondering if the glow was coming from her hands. She looked at her hands in surprise and wondered if this could work. Moments later, she noticed that his wound had healed a little. She was shocked that the wound healed thanks to her light, but she was still skeptical about it. Thanks to the fantasy novel and memories of Alice's former life, the young lady was well aware of magic and divine power. Holy power is light, emanating without any words. It is capable of healing wounds and is a divine power. In this case, she really hoped that her new husband would heal quickly. She saw that the wound was no longer there. She sighed with relief because at least she could do something for him. Alice said with a smile that God's conscience had given her a gift after all. Alice looked at her husband and said goodbye to him until tomorrow. She slowly walked towards the exit. Sometime after Alice left, the Duke opened his eyes. The Duke sighed heavily and squirmed in pain. He was stunned as he could not move, but sometime later he saw a light in front of him. With all his might, he rushed towards the light. He understood that he could not leave everything so easily, and he needed to return. Writhing in pain, he opened his eyes. The Duke was in shock and did not understand what had happened. He had a very bad feeling, as if he had woken up from a strange dream. The shadow of death has always haunted the Duke since his birth. Shortly after his birth, his mother died tragically. Pregnant stepmother, who came right after his mother's funeral, but her child died as soon as it was born. Having lost her child to a nameless noble, everyone expected her to be thrown out of the mansion, but she was lucky. Soon, an incident occurred. With the Duke, he fell from his horse and could not walk. Also, the prestige of the duchy fell due to various scandals. The vassal had no choice but to entrust the duchy to Madame. At that time, Clélus was only 2 years old. And then Madame began to rule the duchy. But Clélus' growing up worried her. She understood that when he grew up, he would take everything from her. So she did whatever she could to kill him, adding poison instead of food additives. She sent killers, but everything was fair. The young man, who was 12 years old at that time, was sent to the battlefield. Everyone believed that he would die on the battlefield. However, contrary to everyone's expectations, he returned safe and sound. Moreover, he made a great contribution during the war. He proudly accepted the dukedom at the age of 16. It was his perfect comeback at the time. Except he got a younger brother while he was at war. The Duke ordered Madame to be taken to the annex and the strangers to collect their things. He soon became focused on rebuilding the Duke's family, which had been on the verge of bankruptcy for 10 years. The Duke forgot a little about the existence of Madame, who lived in the annex. He was remembering the recent events and realized that there was something in the water and he would have to find out what happened. He wondered how long he had slept, for he knew he would have a hard time for a while. He slowly went to change his clothes. A moment later, he looked around the room in shock because he didn't know where the wardrobe was. He looked at his hand in surprise, as there was a wound there. He had a scar on his arm from black magic left in the war. He was told that holy power or medicine were powerless. He knew that the wound must have festered while he lay there, but still he was very much surprised and did not understand what had happened. He sighed heavily and said that the main thing was that he woke up. After changing his clothes, he jumped out of the window. The butler was shocked by what he had just seen. The Duke looked at the butler with a smile and asked how he was doing. Adolf said that he was glad that the Duke had woken up. The Duke said that he would like to know more about everything. Adolf said that as soon as the Duke fell asleep, Madame moved her residence to the main mansion. Adolf said that she kicked out those who could not help His Excellency, all the servants of the Knights of the Duchy. She tried to drive out all his people. The Duke was shocked as the Black Lion Knights led the country to victory. He understood that his proud and loyal people were a thorn in her side. The Duke looked at the butler and asked how much time had passed since he fell asleep. Adolf said about 6 months. He said that the time was right for Madame to take control of the dukedom. He asked if there was anything else he needed to know. Adolf said that the mistress brought all the servants, and also a man named Kilkin became a doctor. Adolf hesitated, as he did not know how to tell the Duke about yet another piece of news. He still said that the Duke was now a married man. The Duke was furious and shocked by this news. Madame told Alice that she was doing a very good job. Alice said that she tried her best to get the job done. Madame looked at her menacingly and told her to take care of her husband, since these are the only duties of a wife. She agreed with a smile because she knew that it was very easy to keep an eye on a guy who was just lying there. Madame looked intently at the doctor, who sat quietly next to them. Alice looked at him with such a look that he trembled with fear, because her look said that if he said a word, she would kill him. But even if she wanted, she could not kill him. But in addition to poisonous plants, she also had evidence of his guilt. He had a store where he was engaged in black trade. Even if he denies everything, the moment the store is opened, his name will come up. Alice knew that the doctor would not be able to escape so easily, and he would face a very severe punishment. Madame said that Lady Melton had sent a letter announcing her arrival in the duchy. Madame looked at Alice and told her to behave properly. Alice was shocked, as she did not expect the lady to come. Alice sighed heavily. Standing on the balcony, she realized that the plot had been distorted. Madame said that the lady said that she wanted to stay in the capital for a while she studied before her debut. Alice was a little puzzled, since the lady was supposed to come after the Duke's death, but everything changed. Sienna Melton is the main character of this novel. The main character learns about the death of her cousin and hurries to the capital. Although the death was suspiciously strange, the funeral passed quickly. After all, the Duchess was tried for poisoning the Duke. However, Sienna noticed that the Duchess denied the fact of her guilt. She intuitively understood that someone else was behind this. Of course, her suspicions fell on her stepmother, after which she began to follow her. Sienna wanted to find at least some evidence against her stepmother. Due to a dark conspiracy, the Diroth family was erased from the empire. The embittered lady wanted to restore the honor of the duchy. She went in search of all the vassals. One day, she healed an unknown dying man, who turned out to be the third prince. Sienna and the third prince fell in love, and the story of two people had a happy ending. There was a happy ending for only two heroes. Minor characters who helped the main characters died. All the minor characters associated with Sienna were dead. Alice did not want to be among them. She knew that there was still time before the story began, and she wanted to quickly escape from the Duke and live in peace. She was puzzled that her plan was going downhill. She furiously asked the question, "Is it really so bad to lose weight and live a little longer?" She was infuriated just by the thought of it. Alice looked at the maid in surprise and asked if she really needed to serve the Duke. Marisa said that it was so, and also asked if Madame had not given her such an order. Alice was puzzled by this fact. The maid looked at her and asked if she had forgotten about it. Alice said with a smile that everything was wrong, and it was time for them to go. The Duke wasted no time getting his body in order. Adolphe looked at the Duke and said that Madame has brought a lady who takes care of the Duke and helps him. The Duke said that it was all very funny, and he could not believe that Madame dug her own grave so quickly. Adolphe said that the good news is that only 2 days have passed. The Duke looked at Adolphe and said that the fact that he had woken up must be kept strictly secret. Adolphe looked at the Duke in surprise and asked what he was talking about. The Duke said that the duchy was in Madame's hands, and he needed time to prepare everything for his return. He said that sudden movements could cause a backlash, and he also wanted to know about the girl who became the Duchess. He learned that Alice was the eldest daughter, and abandoned by her family. The Duke said that she was probably involved in his murder. Suddenly, the Duke heard a noise outside the door. Alice entered the room and noticed that it was very dark in it. The Duke lay peacefully in bed. He was happy as he almost got into trouble. Alice was furious because they were taking the last rays of the sun from him. She greeted her husband and said that he was wonderful today. She said with a smile that if there was a statue of God, it would look exactly like him. The Duke was shocked and did not understand what was happening to her. The Duke was in shock and wondered how she could talk to almost a corpse. He did not understand what was happening at all. A moment later, the young lady heard some noise. She saw the maid come in and asked why she had come. The maid looked at Alice and asked if she was ready. The maid said that she had brought water and cloth for Alice to wipe off the Duke. Alice looked at the maid in surprise and asked if Madame was talking about this. The Duke froze in shock. The maid looked at the lady and called her. Maris looked at her with a grin, as she had to do servant work, and this must have shocked her greatly. Alice was shocked and very embarrassed, as she understood that she had to wipe off her husband. She looked away because she was very embarrassed. Alice looked at her husband, who was lying on the bed. She glanced sideways at his chest with embarrassment. She prayed and asked the Lord not to let her enter this path of temptation. The maid looked at her and told her to get started as soon as lunch would begin. Alice was in shock. She wanted to fall into the ground from shame. She understood that if she was closer, she would lose the trust that she had already gained. Alice saw that the maid had touched the Duke. Alice angrily grabbed her hand and asked what she was doing. The maid looked at Alice in bewilderment. Maris looked at Alice and asked if he shouldn't be undressed to wash him. Alice froze and did not answer. She didn't know if it was right to do this to upon Madame. She wondered what if Madame was up to something and would do it through the maid. Alice said that she would do everything herself, and she could leave. The servant asked in surprise what she was going to do. Alice smiled and said that Madame entrusted her with this work, so she would do everything herself. Maris sighed heavily and said that she was leaving. The young lady looked closely at her husband. She was in shock and didn't know where to start. She understood that since she agreed, no one could do the job except her. She understood that if she took care of him properly, then everything would be fine. She could not leave him. She decided that she would think of him as a beautiful statue. Several times she repeated to herself that he was simply a beautiful statue. She slowly began to undress him. She looked at him with burning eyes and said that she would definitely take care of his body. Alice slowly began to complete the task. She knew she needed to focus. She noticed that he was a very hot statue. The Duke was in shock and did not understand what was happening. Some time later, she said with a smile that the cleaning was completed and it was now shiny. The Duke was angry. He looked at her in surprise and wondered what kind of cleaning she was doing. She said that she would continue in the same spirit and finish cleaning quickly. Alice pulled herself up to her pants. She was shocked and very embarrassed because she could not do such a thing. She wondered if she could leave the removal of her pants until tomorrow and just reschedule the cleaning. She thought that tomorrow she would still be able to take off her pants and clean up. She was shocked and cursed Madam. She knew that from now on she must serve him and understood that she could not leave things halfway. She said she needed to finish cleaning now. She was already reaching for her pants and was about to take them off when suddenly the butler came in and told her to wait. The young lady froze, holding her pants. They both looked at each other, embarrassed and shocked. Alice was very ashamed. The butler walked along the corridor and heard the conversation of the maids, who said that the lady was now serving His Excellency. Another maid said with a smile that she was now wiping the body of the Duke himself. Adolf was shocked by what he heard, as he realized that she was about to wipe the Duke's body. Adolf understood that the Duke's dignity was in danger. He forbade even the servants to do this work. But now he was conscious, and things were very bad. The maid tried to stop him. Entering the room, he told the lady to stop. Alice looked at him in shock and said that he had understood everything wrong. She understood that she needed to calm down, because if she started to panic, she would be considered a suspicious person. She looked at the butler and called him. A moment later, she said he walked in without knocking, and that was very rude of him. The butler looked at her and said he was very sorry. She was very happy because her behavior worked like a charm. The maid looked at the butler and said that no matter who he was, he dare not barge into the room without knocking. Alice was shocked because she did not understand why the maid took up her task again. She understood that Madame had already set her sights on the butler, but Alice could not allow this to happen. Alice thought for a moment and said that it was rude, but he was probably in a hurry. Apparently he had something to say. Adolf looked at her and asked why she was doing the servant's work. He said that he was very surprised. Because of this, he forgot to knock. She said he seemed very shocked, and she completely understood. The maid said that he had no right to burst into the room without knocking, and he should apologize to the lady. Alice looked at her and asked if she was serious. She said that there was no point in making a fuss over such a trifle. Alice asked Maris if she wanted to replace her in this work. She said that she had little time left. The maid said that if they don't mind, then she will leave the way she would like to leave. She looked at the butler and asked if he would come out. She looked at him puzzled, as she had not yet finished cleaning and wanted him to leave. The butler looked at Alice and asked if she minded if he finished. She was shocked and, looking at him, asked what she should say. Madam. He said that she still did not have to do all the duties. He said that he would do some work helping her. Still, the young lady was very glad that she had a butler. Alice understood that Maris simply wanted to push all the work onto her. Alice realized that she didn't necessarily take care of an important part of the Duke every day. She said with a smile that in that case she would leave this part of the work to him. She said that the Duke would find his touch more comfortable than hers. The butler asked if she would come out. She said that she had already wiped off the top part, so the rest was up to him. She wanted to leave quickly. The butler froze in bewilderment, as it looked like she had run away. The butler looked at the Duke and said that everyone had left. The Duke sighed heavily and said that he was very tired. Adolf asked him how he was feeling. The butler said that he was very sorry that he had not come a little earlier. The Duke said that everything was fine, and he did not need to blame himself. The Duke remembered his wife and the fact that she treated someone else's body as something dirty. He thought it was a laugh, and that's all. The butler helped the Duke get dressed. The Duke began to think that her wife had been sold and given in marriage to him. Considering the fact that she was dealing with a madam, he figured she would be a scared kitten. But every day she greeted him with a smile and said interesting things. He understood that she was too strange, and he did not expect this. He had to look after her. The Duke asked the butler if he had sent a letter to the Baron. A letter was sent to the Baron, asking him to send his daughter to them. The Duke knew that when his vassal arrived, it would be possible to divert attention. Madam. He believed that he could get help from Sienna. The Duke said that as soon as she arrived, they could act, but for now they needed to keep their mouths shut. The butler said that he forgot to tell him something. He said that after the Duke fell asleep, Madame gave him medicine for him. But now the young lady has the medicine. He said that he thinks it will be more difficult for him to steal these medicines. The Duke asked if it was necessary to steal these medicines, since the doctor was a madam. The butler said that according to the servants, he has unusual abilities in preparing poison. The Duke told the butler to bring the doctor, as he had to meet him in person. After some time, Lady Melton arrived at the estate. With red hair, like a reflection of the sunset, and green eyes reminiscent of a forest, the lady was like a beautiful rose. Madame greeted the lady with a smile, but there in turn, Madame ignored. She approached Alice and said with a smile that she was very glad to meet her, and introduced herself. She said with a smile that her name was Sienna Melton, and she is Duke Clylus's cousin. Madame froze in shock. Alice was in shock, since they did not have time to meet, but she already felt that the flag of death had risen. Alice told the lady that she had greeted inappropriately. She should have greeted the honorary madam of the duchy first. Alice asked, looking at the young lady, if the Baroness was not very familiar with etiquette. She tearfully mentally asked for forgiveness from the lady. She had to survive in this situation. The lady asked Madame's forgiveness, as she believed that the Duchess was greeting her as head of the house instead of the Duke. She asked for forgiveness for insulting Madame Alice, was shocked since she was very graceful. She politely apologized. Madame said with a smile that everything was fine. She also told the lady to go and rest since she had come a long way. Alice, sitting on the bed, said that today she saw the Duke twice. The first time was when I wiped it, and the second time when I gave it medicine. The doctor told her that there was no point in talking about this with the Duke, since he was sleeping in a deep sleep, and he could not hear her. She said that she knew this, but still when she saw him, she would like to say hello. She said with a smile that she had previously wiped it well, and it seemed to be shining with cleanliness. She said that I was gradually destroying his body, so his skin color was improving. She looked at him in surprise. She wondered if it was all thanks to the divine power she used. She told the doctor that last time he said that there was no chance of saving the Duke. She asked if the wound could be healed through divine power. The doctor said that the Duke is in this state and will never wake up, so there is no point in treating him. She was a little puzzled because she did not understand how she was able to heal the wound on her hand. Yet she saw with her own eyes how the wound healed. He looked at her in surprise and asked why she asked such a question. She understood that she should not talk about it. She looked at the doctor and told him to give her some medicine. A moment later, she gave him the medicine. The young lady looked at the doctor and told him to drink what was left. The doctor looked at her in surprise. She said that she couldn't test it because the maid was here and she didn't know whether it was a food additive or a poison. The doctor took the medicine and drank it. He asked her how he could betray her if she knew his weakness. Alice said she was glad to hear it. She looked at the Duke and said with a smile that they were leaving. The doctor thought that she was still a very strange woman. Even her threats looked abnormal. He was surprised by the way she was talking to the almost dead Duke. A moment later, the doctor came across the butler. The butler said with a smile that he was looking for him. The butler looked at the door in surprise and asked if this was not the Duke's bedroom. A moment later, they entered, and the butler bowed and said that he had brought the doctor. The Duke stood up and looked menacingly at the doctor. Helkin was shocked, as he did not expect this. He fell to his knees and said that this simply cannot be. Looking at the Duke, he shouted that he should not come near him, since he was very frightened. The Duke said that he had not done anything yet, and he was already in a panic with fear. The Duke said that he did not want to listen to the madman. The Duke put the sword to his throat and asked the doctor if he should kill him. The doctor asked for mercy. The Duke said that he had prepared poison to kill him, and now they are asking for his life. The Duke looked at him furiously with cold eyes and told him not to deny it since he had heard everything. The doctor said that he was simply following Madame's orders and did not know who this poison was for. He said that he did not dare to kill him. The Duke angrily said that both were possible. This is true, but he still drank the poison he prepared, and this is a fact. The doctor said in a trembling voice that if the Duke spared his life, he would become loyal for the rest of his life, since he was very useful. He said that when Madame said that the poison was for the Duke, he was very much amazed. The butler called the Duke. Adolf said that since he was the one who created the poison, he knows how to create an antidote, and they can use it. The doctor thanked him. The doctor was in shock, looking at the Duke. He did not understand what happened, since he had recently been poisoned. The Duke asked the doctor, since when he and the Duchess had been practicing medicine, he said that about 4 years ago. The Duke said that he woke up 4 days ago, and he also asked if it was true that the medicine was just a dietary supplement. The doctor said it was just a nutritional supplement. The lady ordered that one nutritional supplement be replaced as well, so he did. The Duke was surprised, as he knew that she came as a human being. Madame, he wondered why she did not obey Madame. The Duke thought for a moment that he had been given a nutritional supplement, but he knew that it definitely had nothing to do with him being able to wake up. The Duke called the doctor, who shuddered. The Duke looked at the doctor and said that since this poison was his work, he should know better. The Duke told him to check his condition at the moment. The doctor looked at the Duke in surprise and said that he would check everything now. The Duke furiously grabbed the hilt of the sword and told him to do everything quickly. The Duke glared at the doctor and said that he had better not do anything stupid. The doctor was very frightened and agreed with the Duke. The doctor looked at the Duke in surprise and said that this was simply incredible and a miracle had happened. But still, the poison is not completely removed from the body, and treatment is needed. The Duke said that since he created the poison, he might as well create an antidote. The doctor looked at the Duke in fear and said that he would do everything within a few days. The Duke looked at the doctor and said threateningly that he had woken up. No one should know. Madame Killian, and also his wife Clylis, told the doctor to simply act as always, following her orders. Clylis looked at the doctor and said that if he found out that the doctor was playing on 2 fronts, then he should pray that death would overtake him faster than his sword. The doctor was shocked. With a trembling voice, he said that he would remember his warning. The Duke looked at him and told him to leave. The Duke asked Adolf if he could look at the hand. Adolfo was amazed because early on the Duke's hand disappeared. The Duke said that when he woke up, the wound had already healed. Clylis asked Adolf if there were any other herbs that could heal the wound 4 days ago. Adolf said that no one came to him until the morning, and those who visited his bedroom were Madame and Lady. For a moment the Duke thought. The Duke, puzzled, said that he had a wife whose face he had not seen, but there was a good chance that the only person who came into the bedroom was a lady. The Duke wondered if she might have something to do with him waking up. Alice looked at the young lady and asked if she would like to tour the mansion with her. Sienna said with a smile that she would like to, since it was her first time here in such a long time, having come here as a child. She said with a smile that she would like to talk with the Duchess and tour the mansion. Madame looked at her in surprise and asked if she really wanted to spend time only with Alice. Alice said with a smile that everything was fine, and Mother shouldn't worry. Alice wanted to quickly finish exploring the mansion and return to the room. She would like to return immediately after the meal, but could not refuse a walk. Sienna told Alice with a smile that her family from the West had heard Alice smiled and said that it was true. Alice knew that the maid wanted to tell her something, as she always kept a close eye on them. The young lady looked at Alice and said that it was a beautiful day and asked if she would like to take a walk in the garden, just the 2 of them. The young lady said that she was very happy when she found out that the Duchess was from the West, since she was worried because the capital was unfamiliar to her. But she still met someone who was from the same place. She looked at Alice and said that she would like to be close to her if she didn't mind. Sienna looked at the Duchess and asked if it was too rude of her to ask. Alice knew that Sienna was very kind, but that was before a special occasion. But still, Alice knew very well how ruthless she was towards her enemies. Moreover, it is dangerous for someone who is the madam's pawn. She knew that the lady would not show her compassion. Alice understood that she could try to find out some information through her, or try to kill Madame through Alice. Alice wondered whether she should show that she was not stupid and timid, or play the fool, which was very stupid. Alice said with a smile that she was very happy with her words. Alice said that, to be honest, she felt that she had been too rude to her yesterday about greeting her mother. She said that they had stopped thinking about it. The young lady froze, as she did not expect to hear such a thing. A moment later she said with a smile that everything was fine, and it was only her fault. Sienna told Alice that she was very kind and also delicate in etiquette. She said that now they can talk about anything without difficulty. Alice was very happy and thought that she did a great job. Instead of attracting attention with the main character, it would not be better to pretend to be a fool who does not know anything about the plans, madam. Alice said with a smile that she thought it was time for her to go, since it was almost time to serve the Duke. Entering the room, she sighed heavily as she realized that she had done her best. Alice said that the lady is like a racehorse, seeing the goal, but not looking at the obstacles. Alice knew that yesterday she ignored Madam, but she was amazed because she didn't think that the lady would call her along. Alice knew that she needed to leave as quickly as possible before the course of history began. She was thinking about the safest way to leave the duchy. At that moment she remembered the holy power, that is, the divine power. While she was looking for information about the temple, she found something interesting. If you become a priest under the protection of the temple in the empire, there is one law that prohibits nobles from contacting priests. The only person who can judge a priest is the Pope. She looked at the book with a smile, as she realized that she just needed to become a priest. She understood that in this case, even Madame would not be able to harm her. She was very surprised because she had read that those who are pure in soul and body can become a priest. She was shocked because she realized that she was already married. Alice understood that this was a very big problem. She did not sleep with him, but still she could not be called pure. Alice understood that this was a very important requirement for priests, and it was better for her to go to the temple and find out everything herself. Alice was shocked because she understood that Madame would not allow her to visit the temple. But still, she decided to pull herself together and find a way to get into the temple. Alice knew that first of all, she needed to do her job. A moment later she heard a knock on the door. She looked at the doctor in surprise and asked what brought him here. The doctor said that the butler was busy with the guest, and since he was free, the butler asked him to replace him. Alice looked at the doctor in surprise and asked if the butler had really asked him to replace him. The doctor said that it was all because the duchy was in trouble, so he had no choice but to help. Alice reluctantly agreed with him. Helkin said that he was still the family doctor of the duchy. Alice looked at him and said that all that was needed was to wipe the Duke. She would wipe the top part, and he would wipe the rest. The doctor was surprised and asked what she was talking about. Alice looked at him in shock and asked why he was shouting so much, and also asked why he was so surprised. It was just the servant's job. The doctor looked at her and said that of course that was true, but he could take care of the Duke's cart himself. Alice thought for a moment as the doctor's behavior seemed very strange to her. Claylas Diroth, a young and outstanding hero of the battlefield. Even for a doctor who lived in the shadows, the story of his extraordinary exploits reached his ears. They said that the Duke finds his enemies to match the wild beast. But now he was lying quietly and peacefully in bed. The doctor was in shock since the Duke trusted his body to a simple woman. The doctor looked at Alice and asked if she always served the Duke like that. Alice said that it was so since it was Madame's order. Alice looked at the doctor in surprise and asked what was wrong. The doctor smiled and said that he did not expect her to get used to this. Alice smiled and said that it was all nothing, since she was simply imagining that she was washing the statue and not the man's body. She said that this is how she feels the passing inspiration. The doctor was shocked and coughed very loudly. She looked at him and asked what was wrong and also told him to drink water. She looked at the doctor intently and warily. She approached him and said that he was too suspicious. Alice asked the doctor what he was hiding. The doctor hesitated and did not know how to answer. A moment later, the Duke looked at him intently, with an angry gaze, and he understood everything. The doctor screamed at the unexpected look. The young lady was shocked. She asked why he was screaming, and turned back. They stood silently for some time, looking at each other. The doctor looked at her and said with a smile that he just didn't feel well, and he swears he wasn't hiding anything. She looked at him and said that his complexion was very bad. She also asked how he was feeling. The doctor said that he was fine and not to worry. The young lady didn't even agree, and said that they should finish already. The doctor looked at her, asked if she would come out. Alice looked at him in surprise, and asked at what stage should she trust the body of a duke like him. She said that she would be there. A moment later, the butler came in and said that he had finished his work early and came here. Alice said with a smile that she had finished her part of the work, so she and the doctor would go. She looked at the butler with a smile and wished him good work. The Duke sighed heavily and told the butler that he had arrived on time. The Duke said furiously that the doctor almost screwed up. The butler looked at the Duke and asked if he was okay. The Duke sighed heavily and said that it infuriated him. He remembered the words of his wife, that she felt the inspiration leaving the Duke was furious, and all this infuriated him. He didn't understand what this woman was thinking about. He thought that she must have some kind of excuse. She regularly took care of him and even talked, realizing that he would not answer her. He also noticed that she was worried that she was obeying Madame's orders and poisoning him. It was very difficult for him to understand her intentions just because she was not poisoning him. Outwardly, she looked like she was playing the role of an ideal wife. He understood that his wife was smarter than she seemed, and more unpredictable. He understood that if this continued, it was unknown when she would add poison. The Duke understood that he needed time to think about everything. The butler approached the Duke and asked in surprise if he was really unwell. The Duke said that he was fine, and also asked how Sienna was. Adolphe said with a smile that everything is fine, and she is doing everything possible for the Duke. The Duke asked in surprise how exactly 10 years have passed since their last meeting. Since childhood, she was confident and very smart. Adolphe said with a smile that she is strong and trustworthy. Even in front of Madame, she is not the least bit timid. The Duke said with a smile that he was very glad that she grew up this way. The Duke asked Adolphe to bring her to him at dawn. The young lady slowly crept into the room. The Duke, looking into the distance, said that she had already arrived. The young lady froze in place. He turned around and said with a smile that they had not seen each other for a long time. The young lady greeted the Duke with a smile and tears in her eyes. He looked at her with a smile and asked what kind of Duke he was. He said that she could call him as usual. She looked at him and said with a smile that she was very glad that he woke up, and at the same time, she called him brother. He smiled and said that he was very happy too. He looked at her and said that everyone was saying that it was a miracle that he woke up. The Duke said that he would like her to help him a little. He also asked if she would mind. The young lady said that she would do anything for her brother. After these words, she was already inflamed. He looked at her closely, as he realized that she had grown up to be quite reliable. The Duke looked at her with a smile and said that they could sit down and talk about everything in more detail. She looked at him and said that it seemed that he wanted to trust her to find all the vassals. The Duke said that this was so, and not only them, but also the knights who had been kicked out earlier. Clyla said that unfortunately, he did not have any opportunities to find them yourself. She smiled and said, that's why he called her. She said that the only one who can visit the mansion with the pretext of debut can also secretly move around. The Duke said with a smile that, as expected, she caught everything on the fly. She said with a smile that this is the basis of magic. Sienna asked what they need to do first. He looked at her and said that first she needed to visit the temple. Sometime later, all the ladies were sitting in the garden and drinking tea. Madame said that it was difficult for the lady to adapt to the capital because she lived outside it. She asked if many things were not the first time for her. Sienna looked at Madame and asked what she was talking about. Sienna said that in their days, there is not much difference whether you live in the capital or outside. It is the same everywhere. Madame Killian looked at her and asked if it was true. Sienna thanked Madame for her concern. Alice was in shock, as it seemed to her as if it was a war of the worlds. Alice understood that they were behaving like cats and dogs at the very beginning of the tea party. She wondered who would win. But looking at Madame, she understood that the lady would definitely win. Alice understood that Madame needed to give up since the main character was against her, who overpowered her with her acting talent and beautiful speeches. Alice noticed red roses that matched the fierce lady, but she couldn't say it. She was puzzled, as she still had not found a way to get to the temple. She did not know how she could go beyond. Madame looked at the young lady in surprise and asked if she really wanted to go out. Alice looked at them in surprise, as she had lost the course of the dialogue in her thoughts. Sienna looked at Madame and said that she would like to go out. She smiled and said that she would like to visit the temple. Sienna looked at her brother in surprise and asked why she needed to go to the temple. Clélu said that first she needed to leave the Duke's house, and if she went to the temple, Madame would not suspect anything. He said that she needed to pretend to be a commoner and also find a cozy star hotel. He handed over the letter and told her to show it to the owner, a man named James. He told her to say that he was looking for a man named Teshern, and he would definitely give her information. She looked at him in surprise and asked if this was the knight and brother. The Duke said that if she found Teshern, she would be able to find all the knights faster. She said with a smile that he should leave everything to her, and she would do everything. Sienna tearfully said that her family is the Duke's family, and she would like to pray because her brother is still not awake. She said that she would like to pray for his health in the temple. Madame looked at the lady in surprise and asked what she was talking about. Alice said that, as a duchess, she was embarrassed to hear these words. Madame looked at Alice in surprise and asked if this was not the responsibility of the hostess. Madame told Alice with her eyes to hurry up and get out of the situation. Alice was in the mood for something else. She looked at Madame and said that she would also like to visit the temple with the lady. Madame looked at Alice in surprise and asked what she was talking about. Alice looked at her mother and asked if they would all pray together and would not their sincerity reach God. Madame looked at the lady and asked for forgiveness. She asked if she could leave them alone with the Duchess. Madame said she had something to tell Duchess Sienna, bowed, and said she hoped they would care and she would leave them alone. The young lady left them. Madame was furious. She looked at Alice and asked what she was doing. Now Madame was furious and told Alice that she could have stopped the lady and dissuaded her. Madame looked at Alice and asked angrily if she hoped to go beyond the mansion. Alice understood that Madame was simply a fiend of evil. Madame said that work on the Duke must take place without leaking information. Alice looked closely at her mother and called her. Alice looked at her and asked if it was not better to stay close to Sienna. Alice asked if Sienna could learn anything when the Duchess was close to her. Madame was shocked and did not answer anything as she was very angry with Alice. Alice said that if she was not given the opportunity to go beyond her limits, she might find it strange. Alice understood that everything needed to be turned back into its own direction. Alice said that eventually she would send a letter to the Baron, and the Baron in turn would personally visit the mansion. Alice looked at Madame and asked what if the Baron found out the truth about the Duke's condition. Alice said that rumors would spread throughout the capital that the Duke had fallen into eternal sleep. Alice understood that while her biological son was small, she hoped that everything would be calm in the duchy. If rumors spread that the Duke is sleeping soundly, a side branch of the family will try to interfere with the succession to the throne. Madame Killian looked at Alice and said that everything was pretty good, and also asked if she could follow the lady. Alice, with a smile on her face, said that she would do everything necessary. Alice was very happy, since she would still be able to go to the temple. The Duke looked at the butler's house in surprise and asked if Sienna had really managed to persuade Madame. The butler smiled and said that it was so, and the Duchess said that she would go with Lady Sienna to the temple. The Duke thought for a moment. Sienna looked at her brother and said that she would try to get permission to go to the temple as soon as it was light. The Duke said that would be good, but he also told her to be careful and not get caught by the madam. He also told her not to get caught by the Duchess either. Sienna said that if he meant the Duchess, then she didn't think she was worth fearing or worrying about. Sienna said that she tried to get information out, but she was too stupid. The Duke looked at her in surprise and asked if she was really talking about the Duchess now. She said that she was talking about her, and she had pink hair, golden eyes, and small stature, and she was like a puppy who runs after Madame with its tail. The Duke was surprised and did not know if the Duchess was really naive and stupid. Clélis understood that this was the same person who deceived Madame and lured the doctor to his side. He wondered if maybe she was hiding her power in front of Sienna. Sienna looked at her brother and asked if there was something she didn't know. The Duke, thoughtful, said that there was no such thing. He said that even if the Duchess was still naive, then you need to be careful with her. The young lady said with a smile that she couldn't go wrong. The Duke knew that he should have told his sister the truth, but he couldn't. The Duke wondered why he couldn't, if he was afraid that the Duchess would get into trouble. It was difficult for him to make a decision when it came to this particular woman. He did not understand why she was hiding her true self. He looked at Adolphe and said that he had one thing for him. Entering the room, the young lady saw the butler. She said with a smile that he was quite early. The butler looked at her and said that he had already taken care of the Duke's cart. Adolphe said that he had thought about this duty for a long time and came to the decision that it was a strong burden for the Duchess. The young lady looked at the butler in surprise and asked what she should say to Madame if she asked her. Adolphe smiled and told her not to worry, since they wouldn't tell anyone about this. He asked if she could leave this responsibility to him, if she didn't mind. Alice looked at him and agreed with him. The butler said that in that case he would go. Alice was surprised and at the same time glad as she accepted his offer without hesitation. At first glance, it may seem like a stone has been dropped from his shoulders, but it is more like he is trying to alienate the Duke from her, since she still looked like a person, Madam. She understood that although this was for the best. She looked at the Duke and said that she was very sad that this line had been drawn. She looked at him and said that she shouldn't get attached to him, but it seems like the opposite is true. She didn't understand how she could not react in any way to the fact that he would soon die. But if this line was drawn in time, nothing would happen, because she was powerless in this matter. She looked at him and said that she was going to leave the dukedom anyway. Sighing heavily, she said that she needed to stop thinking about this attachment. The Duke opened his eyes when she left. He was surprised since she was about to leave the dukedom. To find out more about her, he ordered Adolphe to leave them alone. But still he was puzzled because he did not think that he would hear something like that. He wondered if she really wanted to leave this place and planned this very coming to the estate. The Duke was shocked and thought for a moment. The next day, a carriage arrived for a trip to the temple. Alice looked intently out the window, and her eyes were filled with happiness. Alice was amazed to the core as she actually rode in the carriage, and she felt very comfortable. Sienna looked at Alice and said with a smile that she seemed to be in a very good mood. Alice said with a smile that she was, since she left the confines of the mansion. Sienna said that she had recently gotten married and didn't seem to go out very often for walks. Alice said with a smile that it was all because of the countryside and family reasons, so she asked to go with the lady. Sienna looked at her and said with a smile that she understood. A moment later, the coachman said that they had already arrived at the temple. Alice was shocked as she saw the temple for the first time and enjoyed its beauty. It was truly huge and beautiful. The priest greeted the Duchess and lady with a smile. Alice was shocked as they came out to meet them in person. She knew from the novel that the temple was very friendly to the nobles. Alice said, with a smile, that she was very glad to meet. The priest smiled and said that their temple had a prayer room for them, and he would like to show it. Unlike commoners, the nobles make good donations to the temple. They say the higher the title of a noble, the more respectful they are treated. Sienna looked at them and asked if they didn't mind if she could use a separate room for prayer. Since she wanted to concentrate and devote herself to prayer, Alice, looking at the young lady, thought there was another reason for this. She remembered the words of Madame, who had told her with rage to keep her eyes on the young lady. Alice said with a smile that she fully supported her and thought that she would also be more comfortable praying in another prayer room. The young lady thanked the Duchess for her understanding and also said that they would see each other after prayer. Alice was very happy as she quickly ran away from Madame and lady. Alice walked into a separate spacious prayer room. As she passed by, she saw a beautiful statue of God. She looked at us intently, stood up, and thoughtfully said that the statue looked just like a copy of her husband. She looked at the statue with embarrassment and realized that with her tastes in beauty, the Duke seemed to be everywhere. She understood that if she continued to be obsessed with the Duke's beauty, it would end badly. Alice understood that now she needed to give her heart to the search for what was important. A moment later, she found a book about divine power. She wondered if maybe she shouldn't read it first. This book was written by Nestafel, the first pope of the great god. He wrote that it was worth thanking him before starting to read. Alice wondered for a moment whether she should read such a book. She understood that since it was written by the first pope, the contents must be true. Divine power is a gift from God, a blessing from God. However, not everyone has it. Equally, the strength is different for everyone, depending on the blessing of God that He has given you, and is considered a difference in strength. The strength is that those who can heal small wounds are low-level priests, but those who are able to heal heart wounds are called high priests. However, those who heal wounds and injuries to internal organs are rare even to the average high priest and rise above them. The young lady was surprised because she realized that in order to heal a serious wound, one must be a high priest. She understood that she had definitely healed such a wound from the Duke. But this was rare, even among high priests. She understood that it was very good to have such abilities, but if she became a high priest, then a huge pile of papers and a great responsibility will fall on her. She also understood that she would need to greet the aristocrats. Alice understood that this was an unbearable burden for her. She said with a smile that it was still not worth showing off her abilities, and wondered if maybe no one would find out. Approaching the statue, she asked the question whether God would suddenly make an oracle prophecy for the sake of revelation. She stared at the statue, but there was no answer. A moment later, someone called her. She looked at the statue in surprise and asked if he was really talking. A few minutes later, she heard a knock on the door. The young lady asked if she was okay, and also said that she had come at the request of the high priest. The Duchess sighed heavily and said that the girl could come in. She was shocked because she thought it was a voice from the statue. The young lady greeted the Duchess with a smile on her face. The girl said that the high priest asked her to bring tea to the Duchess. The girl said that tea prepared with herbs grown directly in the temple itself has a wonderful aroma. Alice looked intently at the girl and said to herself that the young lady was the ideal priest she had ever seen. Alice looked at the girl and asked if she could ask a question. She smiled and said that she could ask anything. Alice asked if to become a priest, you had to be pure. The lady said with a smile that everything was true. Alice said that among her acquaintances, there was a man who got married, but due to circumstances remained chaste. Alice asked if such a person could become a priest. The lady looked at her and said not yet. A moment later, she said that once there lived a maiden who gained divine power and became a priest. She said that despite the fact that she grew up in the temple and did not leave its precincts, she heard that those who received divine power can become priests. Alice looked at her and said that even if she got married well, she has God's power. The young lady said that everything was exactly like that, which means she is loved by God. She had never met him, but now she is very grateful to him for his strength. Alice was very sorry that she did not understand his deep meaning, and now apologizes for the words she said earlier. She looked at Alice and said that she was in charge of the registration documents and thought she could help her. Alice looked at the priest in surprise. The young lady provided the Duchess with an application for a new recruit. Alice was surprised. The young lady said that in order to become a priest, you need to pass a test. First, you need to remember the application form and note that it has divine power. After this, you need to pass the test for possession of divine power. Once power is confirmed, the registration process begins. Alice looked at her and thanked her with a smile for such excellent help. She was glad that the check and registration were on the same day. She looked at the Duchess and said with a smile that she could contact whenever she needed, because her friend would soon become part of the God's family. Alice looked at her and asked if she could know her name. The young lady smiled and said that her name was Violet. Alice said with a smile that it was a very beautiful name. Alice wanted to repay her for her kindness. Madame looked at the young ladies and said that they arrived home very late. Madame looked at the lady and told her to go and rest, and the Duchess needed to visit her sick husband. The young lady with a smile told Madame not to worry, since the Duke is the head of the family, and the fate of the family depends on his health. Madame thanked her for her wonderful words. The young lady said that since Madame was attentive to her, she would leave them first and go to rest. Madame Killian was very angry with the young lady. Alice understood that Madame had lost to the young lady. Madame Killian looked at Alice and asked why they were so late, and she also asked if they were somewhere other than the temple. Alice said that it was not like that at all, and they were only praying in their temple. Alice said that the lady wanted to concentrate on prayer, and they went to separate prayer rooms. Later, Alice asked the priest if the corridor was patrolled, and the priest said that the lady had not left her prayer room. Madame Killian told her to still keep an eye on the lady. Perhaps nothing happened, but something might happen in the future. Alice looked at her and humbly said that she understood everything. Madame looked at Alice and with a grin told her to go to her husband and give him medicine. Alice smiled and said that she would certainly do everything she thought to herself, with a grin, that she would go to him and give him a nutritional supplement. Sometime later, Alice came to her husband and gave him more. Looking at him, she felt sad. She sighed heavily, and suddenly a form fell out of her pocket to register in the temple. Looking at him, she wondered what else she could do for him. The Duke woke up and was not in a very good mood. He remembered her words that she told him. Alice wondered what she could do for him. He was a little surprised, as she didn't suspect anything today either. He wondered if she hadn't said that she would leave this place, but for some reason, he felt a lot of sadness in her voice. The doctor looked at the Duke and said that the antidote was ready. The Duke slowly reached for the antidote, but the doctor in turn did not give him the antidote. The Duke looked at the doctor with fury and asked if he had gone crazy. The doctor looked at him and said that everything was wrong. The doctor said, looking at the Duke, that it was very strong. The Duke looked at the doctor in surprise and asked if this meant that he could die because of the antidote. The doctor said that it was not like that at all, but that while it was working, he would have to experience severe pain. Helkin said he added painkiller to the supplement he took earlier, but he thought it might help me. The doctor said that he might get sick. The Duke, in turn, said that everything would be fine and took the antidote from him. The Duke knew that pain didn't matter. He just didn't want to be trapped in the darkness again. Sienna knocked on the door, and the Duke said she could come in. Sienna walked in and greeted everyone. The doctor was amazed by her beauty. He had previously heard that she had arrived, but now they met for the first time. A moment later, Sienna punched the doctor. She looked at him intently and told him not to look so closely at others, as it was rude of him. He was surprised that she could use magic. A true magician does not draw circles of magic. If this is so, then it is of a fairly high level. The doctor, puzzled, asked her forgiveness. The doctor realized that she knew that the Duke had woken up, which meant she had come for a reason. The Duke called the doctor, who was taken aback, and said that he was listening to him. The Duke looked at him with contempt and said that since he had everything, he could leave. The doctor looked at the Duke with a smile and said that in that case, he would go. The young lady looked at her brother and said that she went to the hotel he mentioned and met James. She looked at him and said that there was no need to say anything after she showed him the flyer because Tishern would be waiting at the hotel tomorrow. The Duke asked if they had seen her at the exit from the temple. She said that she had created her circle of magic and left the illusion, then quietly went about her business and returned. Klylos looked at her with a smile as she was simply an amazing mage. The Duke looked at her, asked if there had been anything strange lately. She asked if he was talking about the Duchess. She said nothing special happened since they used separate prayer rooms, and today she looks like a puppy as always. The young lady looked at her brother and asked if she needed to look after the Duchess. The Duke said there was no need for that, and she only needed to find the knights. She said that she would meet with Tishern and report everything to him. The Duke stood near the window and thought about the whole situation. The butler looked at him and asked if everything would be all right, but the Duke did not answer anything and drank the antidote. The Duke was shocked as the antidote had a terrible taste. The butler looked at the Duke and said in a trembling voice that he would stay by his side. The Duke told the butler to do his job. Adolf said that he understood everything. The Duke hoped that the night would pass very quickly and not very painfully. Alice was in shock because she had lost the leaf. The application form for joining the temple was nowhere to be found. She knew that she had the leaf when she returned to the mansion. Judging by the fact that there was no noise in the evening, it means that Madame did not find her. She understood that she could have lost the questionnaire in only one place. It was you in the Duke's room. Sometime later, she entered a dark room. A moment later, she found a leaf under the bed. She sighed heavily, since she had already lost him here. A moment later, she heard some noise. She was in shock, did not understand what she had just heard. She raised the lamp higher and saw that the Duke was writhing in pain. A moment later, she rushed to him because she wanted to know how he was feeling. She screamed at him to wake up. Alice understood that she could not help him in any way, and she needed to run for the doctor. A moment later, she flew into the doctor's room and called him. The doctor looked at her in surprise because he did not understand what was happening at all. She pulled him by the clothes and said that there was no time for an explanation and that she urgently needed to go to the Duke. The doctor was shocked by her behavior. A moment later, they came into the room and saw the Duke writhing in pain. The doctor was shocked as the antidote began to work. Alice looked at him and told him to do something for her soon to make him feel better. The doctor looked at him puzzled and said that he could not do anything since it seemed to him that the poison was spreading even further. Alice was shocked and did not understand how this was even possible. She looked at the doctor with fury and asked if he had secretly given him poison. The doctor, puzzled, said that everything was wrong, and the sleeping poison he created was itself unpredictable and spreads throughout the body. The doctor saw that she was looking at him warily and did not believe him. She looked at her husband, puzzled, and asked if this meant she needed to look after him while he was suffering. A moment later, Alice told the doctor that he could go to his room. The doctor understood that due to the strong antidote, he would be unconscious for about 2 days. He knew that the Duke would not open his eyes in front of the lady. The young lady wondered in surprise whether her divine power would work in this case. She tried not to sympathize with him, but still she couldn't just stand and watch. She hoped that they would ease his pain after she left. But a moment later, Alice saw the Duke writhing in pain. She could not do this to him. Alice took his hand and prayed. She asked him to be spared this unbearable pain. Alice prayed and asked that he would not be in pain. A moment later, she saw that he felt better. Alice sighed with relief as she realized that she had helped him and everything had worked. but suddenly she began to feel very dizzy. The Duke fell into the darkness and drowned in it. He was in great pain, and he had the feeling that the darkness was swallowing him. But a moment later, he saw the light. When he woke up, he was very surprised because he suddenly saw a bright light. He stood up and saw Alice lying next to him. He looked at her in surprise and wondered who this woman was. He saw silk pajamas and a luxurious pity, as well as pink hair. A moment later, he realized it was Alice. He remembered his sister as the one who said that the Duchess had pink hair, green eyes, and was small in stature. The Duchess was more like a puppy that followed Madame with its tail. The Duke looked at her in surprise, since he really saw a small puppy. He did not understand what had happened and what she was doing here so late at night. Clylis was very surprised, as his body became very light, as if he could fly now. He suddenly remembered the light that appeared in the darkness, and the pain that disappeared. This feeling was very familiar to him. Recently, he experienced the same feeling when he woke up. He remembered the words of the butler, who said that the only people who came to the Duke's bedroom were Madame and Lady. At that moment, the Duchess was next to him, and now she was also next to him. He understood that it was impossible for this to be just an accident. He looked at her in surprise and asked if she really saved him. Looking at her, he said that he didn't think she had divine power. This is different from magic, but refers to divine power. Moreover, only a dad can restore the human body in such a short time. The Duke sighed heavily and said that he would never let her go, as he needed her strength. He didn't want to be trapped in the darkness anymore. He looked at the lamp in surprise, as he was interested in why it came to him. At such a late time, along with the lamp, he saw a note near the lamp. The Duke looked at the note and saw that it was an application to join the temple. He was shocked because he realized that she was going to the temple. For the first time, he felt warmth, and now he could not stay in the dark, cold darkness. Alice woke up in the morning and reproached herself. She said that she was abnormal. After using divine power, she fell asleep here, and then in a dream, she moved and released her to her husband. She was shocked as God pushed her along the path of temptation every time. She touched her husband's forehead and made sure that everything was okay with him. Alice said with a smile that it seemed like he was doing better, and she was very happy about it. As expected, she couldn't just ignore him. She wanted to do her best to take care of him before she left. She really hoped that he would not die from this dream. Alice had been visiting the temple for 10 days with Lady Melton. During this time, the battle between Madame Killian and Lady Melton continued unabated. And then Madame took her anger out on Alice. Alice was shocked because Madame was already pretty tired of her. But still, Alice was worried about something else. Her application to join the temple had disappeared. Realizing that Madame had not made a fuss, which meant that no one in the mansion had found her, Alice understood that knowledge now, where the application was not important because leaving the application was dangerous. The coachman looked at Alice and with a smile told her to be careful. Alice looked at him in surprise. She wondered if the coachman had always had such a beautiful voice. She saw this coachman all the time. Sienna looked at the Duchess in surprise and asked what was wrong. Alice said with a smile that everything was fine, and the weather was just beautiful today. Sienna glanced sideways at the coachman. The man in turn hit her with a cold gaze. As in magic, divine power has its advantages. You can develop strength and create barriers for your protection. The young lady wondered, and if the divine power is great, then it seems that it is possible to attack with it. She knew it would be great if she could do something like that. Sometime later, there was a knock on the door, and the young lady said it was Violet. She looked into the prayer room and asked the Duchess if she wanted to take a walk. The Duchess has recently decided to take Violetta as her assistant. They walked slowly to their destination. Sometime later, Alice looked up in surprise as she saw a lot of people. Alice knew that the temple periodically opens its doors to poor people and also distributes food and medicine. So not long ago, she herself became a volunteer in their temple. But one person also influenced her decision. The priest looked at her and said that it seemed that she had arrived to them today. High Priest Prion. is a man who in the future will overcome many things and become a pope. In the novel, he was described as a minister of the temple with a very large reserve of divine power. But besides the novel, Alice learned a lot of interesting things about it. Alice looked at her companion and asked if she really wanted to say that the relationship between the peony and mother was bad. Violetta said that it was so. Violetta said that one day Madame went to pray, but the running people touched her. Madame screamed at the man with rage. She asked him, burning with anger, how he dared insult the nobles. After these words, she took the life of this guy. The high priest was very angry with Madame, but still, the court sided with the aristocrat. Violetta said that regarding the rumors, this is a disagreement between them. Their conflict is known not only in the temple, but also in public circles. As a result, the rumors about their disagreement became ideal information for Alice. The young lady thought that the news of this would reach Madame's ears, and one would make a fuss, but everything turned out okay. She took a new application. Alice knew her secret, so she wouldn't be able to sit idly by if she found out that she was trying to become a priest. In the worst case, she may try to get rid of it. In addition, the temple has its own laws. No one can force a person with divine power to become a priest. It was said that not everyone with divine power can become a priest. All things considered, the young lady simply decided to turn to Prion for help. He looked at her and with a smile thanked her for coming every day. But still, when he learned that she was a duchess and Madame's daughter-in-law, he reacted unusually to the greeting. He had more fame and power than Madame, a man with an outstanding spirit, unwavering concern for the temple. Prion thanked the duchess for her help. Sienna pointed to the hut and told the duke that they needed to go there. A moment later, they came out into the hut. There, they saw young people. Sienna looked at the duke and said that he could take off the ring. The young people saw the veil of magic fall from the duke. The duke said with a smile that a long time had passed since their last meeting. Assistant Tishern greeted the duke and asked how he was feeling here. The commander of the knights, David, burst into tears. He asked the duke to kill him since he was so weak that he could not protect his master and the knights. The duke looked at him and told him to stop. David said that he was very glad that the duke had woken up. Sienna was shocked and wondered if David was the same man who was called a grizzly bear on the battlefield. Tashern said that he was very glad that the duke woke up, and it was simply a miracle. The duke looked at his friends and said that they needed to sit down and discuss everything. The duke looked at them and said that he knew they had a lot of work to do right now. He sighed heavily and said that they needed to speed up a little. Tashern looked at the duke and asked if he really wanted to speed up the schedule. The duke said that it was so, and asked David how many knights had gathered. David said that almost all had gathered. They were waiting for His Excellency to wake up. The duke smiled softly, since he did not expect that they would all be waiting for him. But still he was very pleased. The duke asked how the investigation into Madame Killian was progressing. Teshern said that it was good, since she had done a lot of dirty deeds in her life. In particular, through the Marquis, she flatters the Emperor, and constant bribes are recorded for her. Thanks to this, her son did not lose his place as a student at the academy. The Duke said that, if they collected a lot of evidence against her, it would help bring her down forever. He knew that the fact that she tried to kill him carried a lot of weight and could destroy her. But the problem was that the current emperor of the Pentium Empire was associated with her. Due to the corrupt imperial family, the emperor's power is weakening every day. On the other hand, his reputation was well earned during the war. Because the skills of the Black Lions were superior to the imperial knights, the current emperor believed that his power was under threat. The first prince, who is the only hope for saving power, now lies in a coma. The second prince is considered a fool, most likely to become the next emperor. The Duke made it clear to the emperor that he should not support the second prince, and then he began to distrust him even more. Therefore, when the Duke fell asleep, the emperor did not lift a finger, and he put in the place of the Duchess, the daughter of the Padre family. The emperor very much wanted the death of the Duke, just like Madame Killian. Therefore, he will unconditionally come to her defense, so they must collect as much evidence as possible against Madame. The assistant said that once they have collected the required amount of evidence, they will contact Lady Melton, as there are now plans to conduct an investigation at the Duke's house. The assistant was in shock and did not understand why the Duke wanted to change the plan. He looked at the Duke and asked if he really wanted to tell that he woke up even then. But the Duke in turn did not answer anything. He remembered his wife who wanted serve in the temple. A moment later, the Duke still said that they needed to speed up. Teshern looked at the Duke. I said that since he decided so, then they would support him. The Duke and Sienna were transported using a magic circle. The Duke looked at his sister and said with a smile that her magic skills and rings were incredible. The young lady accepted the praise with a smile and said that it was just a basic level of magic. Claylis looked at Sienna and asked if something had happened to the Duchess lately. Sienna thought for a moment. A moment later, she said that she had heard that she had been working as a volunteer in a temple for the poor for several days. The Duke looked at her in surprise and asked if she was really working as a volunteer. The Duchess looked at the woman and with a smile said that she should eat a lot. The woman in turn thanked her. The young lady was very proud to be a volunteer, but unfortunately, she did not have time to talk with the high priest. She knew it would be much faster to simply become a patient for treatment. The little boys came up to her, and the Pope wanted to say something. A moment later, they asked for forgiveness and turned to her. Alice looked at the little boys and asked if they could have some bread. The boy looked at her and asked if they could have some soup, as his brother had an upset stomach and couldn't eat much bread. The young lady smiled and said that she would give them some soup so that they could eat a lot. The boys looked at her with a smile. A moment later, they thanked her. She looked at them and said that the soup was very hot and they needed to be careful with it. The boy took the plate, accidentally dropped it, and got burned. Alice was shocked. She asked someone to heal the boy, but she noticed that everyone was very busy. She looked at the boy and told him to hold out his hands to her. Alice smiled at him and said that everything would be fine and his sister would not harm him. The boys were shocked since they had not seen magic before. They looked at her and asked if she was a priest. She said with a smile that, not yet, but maybe someday she would become a priest. She asked to keep it a secret for now. They said with a smile that they would remember everything and not tell anyone. Alice smiled and said that in that case, she would give them more food. The little boy smiled and told his brother that his stomach didn't hurt anymore. His brother said that was very good. The high priest approached her and asked if she had just used divine power. The Duchess was shocked by what someone saw. Turning around, she saw Prion. She wanted to tell him about it later, but it still seems to be fate. Alice said that she knows how to use divine power a little. He smiled and said that God believed he had a good heart and cared for the Duke very much, and he also thanked her for curing the child. The young lady was shocked, as his smile was simply dazzling. She looked at him and said that she needed to talk to him, and also asked if he would mind. She looked around because she didn't know where they could talk. He asked her forgiveness and said that he had to take her to the reception room. He said that many people were watching him in the temple, so bad rumors might spread about the Duchess, and only poor people walked along this road, and therefore they could talk calmly. The young lady was surprised and amazed, but she still thanked him with a smile. She looked at him and said that she actually wanted to become a priest, but for this, she needed his help. He looked at her and asked if this was really for marriage. Prion said that if she has divine power, she can become a servant of God, even if she is married. The young lady looked at him and said that she knew about it, but her mother-in-law would try to stop her from becoming a priest. He looked at her and asked if it was because of Madame Killian. Alice looked at him and said that, to be honest, her family sold her. It was some kind of deal between Madame and her family. That's why she became a duchess. She said that she still could not become a priest of her own free will, since her husband was still sleeping, and there was no future for her. But suddenly, God blessed her. She looked at him and asked if he could help her become a priest. and start a new life. The young lady was waiting for an answer. Prion looked at her and said that he would certainly help her with this. She looked at him and asked if it was true. A moment later, she thanked him with a smile. At this joy, she took his hand. Prion looked at her embarrassedly and told her to let go of his hand. The young lady asked for his forgiveness. He said with a smile that everything was fine. He asked if they could discuss a plan tomorrow to stop the madam. The Duke stood behind the wall of the building and watched them. He heard their entire conversation. He remembered the words to his sister that his wife became a volunteer, but as expected, she had a different goal. The Duke understood that if the temple protected Alice, and if Madame put a lot of pressure on the Duchess, then the temple would not leave so easily. And the High Priest did not feel kindness towards Madame, but rather disgust. The Duke understood that his wife had found a truly good man. The Duke thought for a moment about his wife's difficult life. He wondered if it would be right for him to keep her close. But still, he did not want to lose this color. He knew he had to do everything possible to not lose her. Looking out the window, Alice told the Duke that everyone was saying that a guest was coming. Several days have passed since Prion offered her his help. Meanwhile, in order to cure the Duke, you will need to wait 3 days so that Madame does not suspect anything, after which she heard that the High Priests will visit the mansion. The High Priests visited the mansion once a month. Their visit was for the purpose of using divine power on the Duke. Their divine power could not wake up the Duke. Madame, who pretended to take good care of the Duke, met the High Priests every month, and they had no reason to refuse the donation that Madame made. The next day she told Prion about this. He looked at her and said that this was a great opportunity, as he would be visiting the mansion on the pretext of a visit. The young lady was very happy that the plot was developing this way. He looked at her and said with a smile that then she should announce that she would become a priest. She was very happy because this was her plan. The day finally came. She of course wanted to say that she would leave. But still she felt strange every time she thought about leaving. She knew that she shouldn't be sorry after all. A moment later she was told that the priests would arrive soon. She slowly left the room. The young lady looked closely at the Duke and said that she was very sorry that she would leave him. The Duke lay silently in bed. Alice went downstairs and saw the lady. A moment later, Madame saw them and said that it looked like they were already here. Alice looked at Madame in surprise, because she didn't understand who dressed so luxuriously. Madame looked at them and said that, as they already know, today is the Duke's treatment, and every time the priests come from the temple for this purpose. Madame looked at the lady and said that for this reason she should behave appropriately. Alice was shocked, because she understood that the lady was starting a war. The young lady looked at Madame and said with a smile that she had no need to worry. Alice and Madame were shocked. Alice wondered if the lady would just remain silent. A moment later, the estate received word that a carriage from the temple had arrived. The priests slowly exited the carriage. Madame was shocked by what she saw. She looked at the High Priest in surprise and asked why he was here. The High Priest bowed and greeted Madame and asked how she was doing. Madame looked at him and said that she was fine. She thanked him for visiting them, but still, Madame said that an unexpected guest had come with them. Prion came closer to Madame and said that they had not seen each other for a long time, and that things seemed to be going well for her. Madame looked at him angrily and asked if he didn't like the fact that she was doing well. He looked at her and asked what she was talking about. He said that he just heard that her son's illness was not letting go. He looked at her and said that it didn't seem to bother Madame at all. Madame Killian was furious. She looked at him and asked if he thought she was a heartless mother who didn't care about her son's condition. He looked at her and said that he knew that she was not the kind of person who was capable of doing this. He looked at her and asked with a smile if she had not visited the temple, making a lot of donations for the treatment of her son. He looked at her and said with a smile that today he would do everything possible to make her heart reach God. Alicia found everything very strange, since she thought it was kindness and compassion that would make Madame smile silently. He looked at the Duchess and addressed her. A moment later, he asked with a smile if she could lead them to the Duke's bedroom. After some time, everyone gathered in the room. A moment later, the priests used their power on the Duke. The young lady noticed that with the arrival of each priest, she became warmer and more dazzling. After the priests used their power, they sighed heavily and were exhausted. The high priest looked at the madam and said that they had already done everything. The young lady looked at them intently. She had previously heard that if the priest uses his power, he gets very tired. After that, she thought that apparently this is all true. She thought for a moment since last time she fainted and slept all night next to the Duke. She looked at her friend in surprise. As he was looking at her intently and smiling, she noticed that everything was fine with him and he was not even tired. Alice was not surprised, since he would be the next dad. Madame approached the high priest and thanked him for his efforts. She said that she would send donations. He smiled and said that they were finished. Prion looked at them and said that they should wait a little, since not everything was done yet. The priests looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Alice looked at the Duke with longing and sadness. She understood that now it was time for her to go. She mentally said goodbye to the Duke. Prion looked at everyone present and said that the reason he visited the Duke's mansion was to visit the new priest. Everyone looked at him in surprise because they did not understand who he was talking about. Alice looked at everyone and said that she wanted to become a priest. Madame Killian was in complete shock. She never expected this, since she was sure that he would not wake up. Adolphe and Sienna froze in surprise. Of course they knew the truth, but they didn't think that the Duke would wake up so suddenly. Alice looked at them and said that she has divine power, so she wants to show it to them right now and then go to the house of God. The Duchess looked at her mother and said that she would become a priest and would pray for her ex-husband. Madame was in shock, did not understand what her daughter-in-law was talking about. Alice said that, as a priest, she wished happiness for Madame and the Duke. Madame looked at Alice and asked what kind of nonsense. She said that she in turn would never become a priest. Madame asked with rage what kind of nonsense was in her head now. Madame walked up to Alice and pushed her. Alice was shocked because she knew that Madame would definitely get angry, but she didn't know that she would behave like that. Madame did not have time to hit Alice when suddenly Prion stood between them. Madame was in shock as she did not expect this. She looked at the high priest with rage. Alice looked at the high priest in surprise, and Madame in turn furiously shouted at him to step aside. The high priest looked at her furiously and said that he would not step aside because the Duchess had declared that she would become a priest, and he could not just stand by. Madame said that she was her daughter-in-law, and this did not concern the high priest. Madame looked at them with rage and asked if they thought that she would so easily allow her to become a priest. Alice understood that if this continued, the high priest would not take responsibility for this. Alice looked at her mother and said that she asked the priest for help. Alice looked at Madame and asked if she didn't say before that Alice was not good enough to be a duchess. Alice said that she also thought about it, but the Duchess got better, even with her coming, so she wants to become a priest and live her own life praying for the Duke's future. Madame attacked her furiously and said that she really refused to listen to her. But a moment later, they heard a voice. They were shocked as the voice came from the bed. Everyone present was shocked as they noticed that the Duke opened his eyes and woke up. The butler and Sienna rushed to the Duke. They were very glad that he woke up. Madame in turn froze in shock. The priest said that this was a miracle of God. Alice looked at him in surprise. Since he still woke up, she did not believe her eyes. One of the priests said that the Duke must have been touched by the words to the Duchess and opened his eyes. Alice froze in bewilderment. She did not understand what she had to do with it. The Duke looked at the young lady in surprise and asked which Duchess they were talking about. The young lady looked intently into the Duke's eyes. They now looked as they were described. In the novel, they resembled the night sky, but still she was very scared. The Duke looked at Alice and asked furiously if she was a duchess. Madame hesitated and did not know how to answer this question. The Duke said furiously that this was very strange, since he did not remember getting married. Everyone started whispering because they didn't understand how it happened. Madame came closer to the Duke and softly said that everything was for his sake. Madame Killian came closer to him and said that after he fell asleep, it was very difficult for her and she could not find a place for herself when she took over the management of the estate. She said that she did not have time to take care of him, so she married him, so that the Duchess would help her take care of him. Madame said that she could not believe that her son opened his eyes. She said with a smile that the gods had heard her prayer. The Duke looked at her with fury and asked if she had really married him to the woman she herself had bought for him. High Priest Prion came closer to him and asked for forgiveness. He said that his wife would soon become a priest. Madame asked if she didn't say that the Duchess would not be a priest. Another priest looked at Prion and said that he thought now was not the time to discuss such things. The maids whispered and said that the lady was not happy about the awakening of the Duke. One of the priests said that the young lady said that she would become a priest, but since the Duke woke up, then now there is no point in becoming a priest. Alice was in shock. She did not understand how this happened. Got it. The Duke looked at them and told them to come in 15 days. He said that now he is a little confused about what is happening due to the awakening. He said that he will specialize for 15 days. Then they will discuss everything and hear what the Duchess really wants. Prion was shocked. He wanted to take Alice. Now the high priest came closer to him and said with a smile that that was enough for today. Prion looked at the young lady and asked if she was okay. She, of course, was against it. The Duchess understood that the Duke did not block her path to the temple, since her husband had woken up, and if she said that she would remain in the Duchess's place, the high priest would consider it strange. But still looking at them, she said that she agreed. Some time later, all the close associates remained in the Duke's room. The Duchess was shocked. She said everything correctly, but still she did not know what to do in this situation. The Prion looked at her and said that if anything happens, then she must inform him. Without fail, Alice was very glad that the Prion still wanted to help her. The Duke looked at the banana and said that he thought it would be better for her to leave now. The Duke also told Sienna and Adolphe to leave as well. The Duke looked intently at his wife and said that they should talk about all the disagreements that had accumulated during this time. Alice was in shock. She didn't understand what disagreements they would talk about now. From his lips, it sounded as if he wanted to eat her. Alice looked at Madame dumbfounded. She showed with her eyes that she was not to blame. Madame looked at her and said that she was leaving. The lady was shocked. She did not want to be left alone with their Duke. A moment later, she was left alone in the room with the Duke. Alice was shocked by this. Alice understood that the Duke did not know everything, so he perceived her as a person, Madame. In addition, she did not at all expect that he would want to talk to her. She was shocked and very scared because she did not know what to do in this situation. Alice fell to the floor and said that she was not Madame's person and asked him for help. Alice said that Madame told her to kill the Duke, but she did not agree to her order, and there is another witness to her rightness, the doctor. The Duke came closer to her and extended his hand. The young lady froze in bewilderment. He looked at her and said that he knew she was not human. Madam. The Duke told her to get up because the floor was cold, and she might catch a cold. Alice was in shock. She stared at the Duke for a while because she couldn't believe everything that was happening. Alice accepted his offer, and the Duke helped her up. She looked at him embarrassed since he was very close to her. Duke said that first they should sit down and talk about everything. Duke said that first they should talk about misunderstandings. The young lady looked at him intently. Claylas looked at his wife and said that he did not intend to kill her. Alice was in shock because she could not believe that he was saying this. She looked at her in surprise and asked what he was talking about. Claylas said it was because she saved him with her divine power. The young lady looked at the Duke in surprise and asked if it was thanks to her divine power that he woke up. The Duke said that she could believe it, since he had no need to lie to her. Alice understood that he was telling the truth. She said that she first used her power quite a long time ago. She looked at him and asked if he hadn't slept since that day. She knew that a month had already passed since the day she healed his arm. The Duke looked at her and asked if it was important, whether it is. Alice was shocked, as she knew it was very important. Alice wondered if he had heard everything she told him. The Duke understood that he should not tell her the whole truth. Claylus looked at her and said that you moments of using divine power, he came to his senses for a short time. But in the morning, he woke up completely. The young lady froze, listening intently. She looked at him in surprise and asked if before that he had really pretended not to know anything. The Duke said that it had to be done this way. The Duke said that divine power is enough to save a person, but this is not often the case. The only person who is capable of such a thing is Prion, candidate for the place of the future pope. He looked at her and asked what would happen if the temple found out about this. He said that the priests would not leave her alone. The young lady was taken aback and thought for a moment. She had previously heard that the inside of the temple had its own strict laws. There would be those who were for and those who were against. She understood that if she suddenly got into a power struggle, she would probably be killed. The Duke looked at his wife and said that he wanted to tell her something. She looked at him in surprise because she wanted to listen carefully. The Duke said that he was asking her not to become a priest, but to stay by his side. Alice was frozen in shock. She looked at him and said that she was against it. She didn't expect the Duke to say something like that. The Duke asked her to stay. He said that he would give her whatever she wanted, money of power. The young lady looked at him and said that this would not buy her. She wondered if he really wanted her to die at the hands of Madame, since she understood that if she stayed, this would certainly come true. The Duke looked at her in surprise, as he did not know what else to offer her. A moment later, he asked, how about he give her his body? The young lady froze in embarrassment and misunderstanding. She looked at him in surprise and asked if he was crazy. The Duke thought for a moment and said that apparently it didn't work. He looked at her with a smile and said that, to be honest, his mind had cleared from sleep. She nevertheless decided to come to her senses, since she almost fell for his beautiful face. She looked at him and embarrassedly said that she was very sorry, but she could not stay next to him, since Madame would not let her live in peace. He looked at her and told her not to worry about such things, as the madam would soon fly out of the mansion. The young lady looked at him and said that then she had no reason to stay. The Lady Witch would be banished. She looked at him and asked if she hadn't saved him. Alice asked him for help, as she wanted to become a priest. The Duke looked at her and said that only through his corpse would she become a priest. The young lady was furious, as she wanted to escape from this damned place, and he was breaking down like a maiden. She looked at him and said that since he had woken up, there was no point in her staying near him. The Duke looked at her with a menacing look and said that he was not yet fully recovered. He said that it was she who helped him cope with the darkness inside, so he asked her to take responsibility and see it through to the end. The young lady froze. She did not expect to hear something like that. It was very difficult for her to make the right decision. She looked away from him and asked that if she said in 15 days that she wanted to become a priest, would he really blab about her divine power? The Duke tenderly took her hand and said that he would look back on the Duke's honor, that he would not put her in danger. A moment later, Adolphe, outside the door, said that the doctor was waiting for him on Madame's orders. The young lady sighed heavily and said that, since they had already finished, then she will go. Looking after her, the Duke said that they would see each other tomorrow. The young lady was shocked, since his words just sounded like a threat, but still she decided that they were just words. The young lady walked around the mansion. At night, she noticed that no one was there and was very happy. She understood that she couldn't just leave everything like that. In any case, she had to leave the duchy in 15 days. She wanted to find out from the doctor whether the Duke had recovered. Claylus had said earlier that he would like to kick Madame out soon. She understood that if he fell asleep again, she would have to retreat. She remembered that after Maris left, Madame did not make a fuss. She still saw some strangeness in this. Alice looked at the door in surprise, as it was wide open, and wondered why that was. Entering the room, she saw a complete mess. Things were all scattered. She looked into the distance in surprise and saw the doctor sitting on the floor, surrounded by scattered things. Alice looked at the doctor in shock and asked what happened to him. Helkin, in turn, looked at her intently but did not answer. Alice looked at the doctor in surprise and asked if her mother-in-law really tried. The doctor smiled and said that fortunately he did not die. Alice realized that Madame did not seem to recognize her plan and that she did not intend to poison the Duke. She looked at the doctor and thought that perhaps he was not such a bad guy. She looked at him and said that she would like to know about the Duke's condition. Alice looked at the doctor and asked if the Duke was completely recovered. The doctor, puzzled, said that the Duke needed some time to recover. Soon he would feel better. The doctor said that he would not fall asleep again. The doctor was shocked because every time he spoke, his life hung by a thread. The young lady knew that his words sounded very cool, but she still wondered if this meant that the Duke would not let her leave in 15 days. They stood for some time, looking at each other in complete silence. The doctor looked at her and asked for forgiveness. He said that he was very tired and also asked if she had any other questions. Alice looked at him puzzled and said that she had no more questions, but she also said that if he wants to survive, then you need to stop your mother-in-law, and the only way is to tell the Duke about everything. She looked at him and told him to leave the dukedom, to move on with his life. She said that she was sincere, considering that they worked together. The doctor looked at her in surprise and bewilderment. A moment later, he thanked her for her advice, and she looked at him and told him to rest well. After talking with the young Duchess, he couldn't even say whether it was good or bad. But a moment later, he looked at his watch and remembered that he needed to hurry to the Duke. Sienna looked at the Duke in surprise and asked if the Duchess really saved him, thanks to her prayer. Claylis said it was, and he definitely heard her voice when he woke up. He understood that it was best to keep everything a secret, so that Alice's feminine power was strong and could save a person from death. He looked at his sister and said that the one who saved his life was the Duchess. The young lady thought for a moment and said that this simply could not be true. She assumed that she had simply underestimated the Duchess. She said that she thought that the Duchess was just a stupid bunny. The Duke sighed heavily and said that the Duchess played the role of the stupid one quite well. Sienna looked at the Duke in surprise and asked if this meant that the Duchess had nothing to do with Madame Clylus, said that everything was true, and she did not obey Madame's orders from the very beginning and acted on her own. He looked at his sister and asked what happened. As she looked at him very surprised, the Duke said that he would take care of the rest himself, and she needed, as before, not to attach importance when communicating with the Duchess. She looked at him in surprise because she wondered if he was really offering, as before, to score on her. She had a lot of questions, but still she agreed with him. Adolphe looked at the Duke and asked if he would return to his duties. Claylis said that if he returned immediately, he would not be able to plead illness. He said that to begin work as soon as he returned, his people first, he needed to visit the Imperial Palace. The Duke looked at the butler and asked if he had conveyed his words to Madame. The butler said that he had done everything and the priests would arrive in 15 days. The butler said that he advised Madame to be careful and not spread ridiculous rumors about the Duchess. The Duke thought about everything for a moment. The butler looked at him and asked, "What about the maid who serves the lady?" The Duke thought about it and remembered that maid who wildly infuriated the Duchess, and instead of complaining, she silently tolerated her. The Duke told the butler to find a new maid. The Duchess needs him. He will help her. The butler looked at him and said with a smile that he would do everything. The Duke looked at his sister and said that it was already late and she needed to go to bed. The young lady in turn agreed and left him. For some time, the Duke looked intently at the doctor and said with rage that he was late. Helkin was dumbfounded and said that the conversation with the young Duchess had dragged on for a long time. The Duke asked in surprise what they were talking about. The doctor said with a smile that the Duchess took care of him and gave him one piece of advice. Thinking about this, he couldn't believe that anyone was worried about him. The Duke looked closely at the doctor and saw a completely different look. The Duke looked at the doctor and said furiously that he and his Duchess seemed to be very close. The doctor looked at the Duke in surprise as he saw that the Duke was burning with rage. The doctor realized that he needed to quickly get out of this situation and said that she was asking about the Duke's health. The doctor said that if you think like that, the Duchess was very worried about him, so she asked about His Excellency's condition. The Duke sighed heavily, since he did not understand everything correctly. He looked at the doctor and asked why he didn't say anything right away. The Duke said that in a week he was going to the Imperial Palace. He told the doctor to prepare everything about the sleeping poison. The doctor thought for a moment. The first prince who fell asleep from the poison was the first prince. The whole empire knew the fact that the prince drank poison and could not wake up for several years. The Duke looked at the doctor and said that Madame would try to kill him again. Clylus told the doctor that he intended to use him in his plan for protection. The Duke told the doctor to pretend to follow all her orders and write down her words on this magical artifact. And when the right day comes, the doctor needs to return it to the Duke. The doctor understood that if he removed the poison that the first prince drank and provided this evidence, then the Duke would save his life. Helkin said that he would certainly do everything. The Duchess went out onto the terrace and sighed heavily. The young lady was furious. She shouted to God that if she met him, he would not live. The maid at the door asked if the lady was awake. Alice told the maid that she could come in there. The maid said with a smile that this was their first meeting, and her name was Eileen, and from today on she would be her personal maid. Eileen said that the butler ordered her to take good care of her mistress. Alice was a little surprised because the maid did everything very carefully. Alice was very happy because the maid was a very good girl, and the god heard her prayer. Alice looked at the maid and asked if Mother wouldn't come down for breakfast. Eileen said that Madame had breakfast in the room. Alice was very happy. She said that in that case, they should go to the dining room. Sometime later, they walked leisurely to the dining room. A moment later, Alice bumped into Lady Sienna. Sienna, in turn, greeted the Duchess with a smile. Sienna looked at the Duchess and said that she had something to say. Alice was at a loss. Madame looked at Alice and said with rage that she was impudent to her will. Madame looked at Alice with fury and said that she had caused a fuss in the house because she said that she would become a priest. Madame looked at her and asked if this one really wanted to pick up and leave, as if nothing had happened. She said that this was just shamelessness. Alice was shocked. She thought that it would be better for her to remain silent. Sienna looked at Madame and asked what she meant. She asked Madame if it was not for the sake of the Duke that the Duchess would become a priest. She said that, moreover, she thinks that thanks to the prayers to the Duchess, her brother woke up. The young lady said that Madame didn't seem happy about the Duke waking up. Madame looked at the young ladies dumbfounded. She was shocked and didn't know what to answer. Alice understood that it was better for her to leave quickly, so as not to lead to a conflict. She looked at everyone present and said that she would go. Madame looked at the maid in surprise and asked who she was. The maid looked at Madame in surprise and said that on the orders of the butler from today, she is serving the Duchess. Madame, in turn, was very angry. She said that she was the mistress of this house, and she did not give her permission. She looked at them and asked how dare the maid ignore the mistress of the house. Madame angrily told the maid to ask for forgiveness right now on her knees, so that everyone could see who the mistress is here. Alice was shocked by this behavior, Madame. Alice was shocked because she thought that her maid was getting permission from Madame. Alice understood that since Madame was very angry, she would definitely beat her maid. Alice blocked her path and came to the maid's defense. Madame looked at Alice with fury and asked if she had really objected to her now. Alice told her mother that the maid had come to serve her and it was unfair to punish her for this. The young lady looked at Madame and said that this was true, and there was no point in it. Madame said with rage that they were both completely insolent, and it was necessary to rid Alice of this. A moment later there was a very loud bang, and Alice froze in bewilderment. Madame, in turn, was very shocked. Alice looked in surprise at the lady who stood in front of her and took the blow. The young lady looked at Madame with contempt and said that she was so angry that she was ready to hit someone else. She looked at Madame and asked if she really should have such dignity. Madame looked at the young lady in shock and asked how dare she tell her about dignity. A moment later the butler came and asked what was happening here. He was very surprised by everything that was happening. Madame froze because she did not know what to answer. A moment later, looking at the young ladies, she said that she was trying to impose discipline in the family. She said that she would not make a fuss about it. She looked at them with contempt and told them not to dare talk about her authority. Alice looked at Madame in surprise as she ran away with her tail between her legs and didn't even say anything to the butler. Alice understood that she needed someone weak to take out her anger on him. Alice looked at the lady and called her. Alice slowly walked up to the young lady and asked, puzzled, if she was okay. Alice looked at the young lady and said that her cheek was swollen. Alyssa was alarmed because the young lady's beautiful face was ruined. She said that there might be a bruise. For a few minutes, she continued to speak in a hurry. Sienna looked at the Duchess in bewilderment. Sienna laughed and said that Madame was just crazy. Sienna looked at the young lady and said that it turned out that the blow would be strong because she looked small and fragile. The Duchess looked at her in surprise. She wanted to cure her with her divine power, but she knew that this was not the right place. Alice looked at the lady and said that they needed to move a little further. She looked at her and told her not to move. A moment later, she used her divine power and slowly healed the young lady. Sienna thanked the Duchess with a smile. She said that both the Duke and she received help from the Duchess. Alice looked at her in surprise and said that it was all because of her, and she had to help. Alice remembered the Duke's words. The young lady said with a smile that everything was true, and he was able to wake up thanks to her prayers. Alice looked at the young lady. Since she said about prayers, it seemed to her that the Duke was most likely keeping a secret about her having divine power. Sienna looked at the Duchess and asked her forgiveness, because when she first saw her, she thought that the Duchess would not be useful to the duchy. Alice said with a smile that everything was fine. Sienna sheepishly said that she didn't know the Duchess was a good person, and now she hoped they would become friends. Alice was surprised, because she did not expect to hear something like that. Madame was very angry and did not understand how they dared to mock and neglect her. She understood that the Duke had already woken up and began to act. The head maid looked at Madame and asked her to calm down. Madame said with rage that she was full of seriousness, and the thought of being hit in the back made her angry. She looked at the maids and asked if the Duke and his sister were not protecting Alice. The head maid looked at Madame and asked if she really thought that the Duke woke up only from the Duchess's prayer. The maid said that everything looks very strange. Now the lady is in the hands of the Duke, and like his spy, the maid looked at Madame and said that she knows the weak point of the young lady. Madame thought for a moment and remembered the young lady's weak point. According to her father, she was a child who lived as if she did not exist. After all, she got into the carriage heading to the Duke's house without a single protest. Madame looked into the distance with a grin and said that if you write a letter to her father as soon as she meets her father, she will immediately become a good girl. A week later, Alice slowly walked around the estate. But a moment later, she heard the maids whispering. They were discussing the heavy atmosphere that hovered in the duchy. They said that when the Duke returned to work, he would certainly throw him out. Madame, another maid, said that more than a week had passed since the Duke woke up, but nothing had happened. Neither the Duke nor Madame left their bedrooms. The maid said that nevertheless, no one knows anything, and anything can happen. The Duchess listened to the gossip of the maids. She noticed that Lady Sienna was constantly going somewhere. The staff were whispering about Madame. She now felt more worried just because of this lull. She thought about the Duke because she wanted to know if everything was okay with him. She wanted to know if he was feeling unwell. She remembered him saying that his body had not yet fully recovered, and she needed to take responsibility for everything. Alice wondered if she should use divine power. She was shocked as his face kept popping up in her head. A moment later, she heard someone calling her. She looked at Eileen and asked what happened. Eileen looked at the mistress and, breathing heavily, said that she should go get her quickly. Eileen looked dumbfounded at the Duchess and said that her family had dedicated the dukedom. Alice was very surprised because she did not expect this. She did not know about her family and could not see them. The father looked at his daughter and asked angrily what it meant that she wanted to become a priest. Count Rocky Potter said that he put so much effort into marrying her to the Duke, but in the end she wants to give up everything and become a priest. Alice's mother, Countess Fodry, looked at her daughter and, with tears in her eyes, asked if Alice had forgotten how Madame cared for them. The Countess said that Madame had paid all their debts. Alice's brother Eric looked at his sister with contempt. Alice thought for a moment. She looked at her family and realized that Madame had called them, as she now wanted to threaten her through her family. The Count looked at his daughter and angrily told her to get on her knees and ask Madame for forgiveness now. Alice looked at them in surprise and asked with a smile why she should do this. The Count looked at his daughter in surprise and furiously asked why she did not obey his words. The Duchess understood that Alice had done exactly this before, but she was a completely different person, and she would not do what they wanted. Alice looked at her mother and asked what kind of gratitude she was talking about. Alice looked at them and asked if this was not a favor given to the Count in exchange for selling his daughter. The Count and Countess were shocked by these words from their daughter. Alice looked at her parents and said that they knew what Madame demanded of her, and yet they sold her to the Duke's family. The Count came closer to his daughter and told her to speak more quietly because she knows what will happen to them. If the Duke hears, they will die, and she too. Alice looked away and said that she knows this, and it would be better to find a way to live peacefully. She told her father that he screams louder than her. The Count came closer to her and took her hand and said that the only thing to do was to follow Madame's order to the end. He looked at her and asked if she should abandon her family. She pushed him away and said that she didn't do this step, and mother and father, and now that the Duke has woken up, she is not going to follow Maidan's orders. She looked at her parents and said that for this reason, stop making noise, and they should just go home. The Count and Countess were shocked by their daughter's words. She looked at them and said with a smile that she would end it and leave them first, and she hoped that they would never meet again. The young lady slowly walked towards the exit. A moment later, her brother walked up to her and grabbed her by the shoulder. He was shocked because she dared to speak ill of her family. He angrily told her to quickly kneel down and beg for forgiveness. The young lady thought for a moment, and it became painful to eat as she recalled Alice's memories of her brother regularly bullying and beating her. She looked intently and angrily at her brother. She was very painful from the memories of the former owner of the body. Her brother looked at her with a grin and contempt. He said that now he thinks she has come to her senses. If she doesn't want bad consequences, then she needs to listen to what they tell her. She looked at her brother with fury and said that she immediately took it and ran. The heels are already sparkling. The young man froze in bewilderment. He did not expect her to say something like that. She looked at them and said with a smile that they shouldn't have taken the money for nothing. Without understanding the topic, she looked at them and asked with a smile, "How about finding another way to make money?" Her brother was surprised. He looked at her, asked what she was talking about. Alice said that she thought he was the best son. The young man was furious and shouted at his sister. He did not understand how she dared to order him. She looked at him and said angrily that her name was Alice Deeroth, and he should remember that already. Her brother was furious, and in anger he waved and angrily asked how she dared to shout at him. But suddenly, unexpectedly for everyone, a loud sound was heard. Her brother froze in bewilderment, and with his hand raised, The Count and Countess were dumbfounded with shock. Turning around, they saw the Duke, who was slowly walking towards them. The Duke looked at them and said that he would turn out to be on time. Alice was in shock. "I didn't understand where he came from here." The Duke looked intently at everyone present. He approached his wife and said with a smile that she seemed to like to get involved in unpleasant situations. He looked at her family and said angrily that he thought his wife was surrounded entirely by rubbish. The Duke approached her brother and asked if he really wanted to raise his hand against the Duchess. The Duke angrily asked, "How dare a nonentity without a title try to hit the Duke's wife?" The young man was trembling with fear. He even fell because he was very afraid for his life. He could not utter a word. Alice knew that it was for the best, but she also knew that she needed to calm down. She looked at the Duke and asked what brought him here. Her family trembled with fear. The Duke looked at her with a soft smile and said that he heard that they were visited by guests, so he came to say hello to her family, while he called her dear, with a soft smile. Alice was in shock. She did not understand why he did this to her, calling. The Duke looked at the guests and said that it seemed that things were going not very well. He asked his wife if she needed help. The Count trembled with fear and called for his daughter. The Duchess knew that this was an unscrupulous family that had sold their daughter and had not changed a bit. She wondered if it was possible to at least a little revenge for Alice, who suffered so much when she left. She left only an empty body. Alice looked at her family and told the Duke to kick them out and don't even dare to go near the mansion. The Duke supported his wife with a smile. The Duke looked at them with rage and ordered the servants to throw them out of the estate. The Count was shocked. He looked at his daughter and said that she could not do this to them. Alice looked at the Duke and thanked him for his help. She said that she did not want this, but since the Duke offered his help, she could not refuse. She said that she did not owe him anything. She understood that he could take advantage of it and will ask her to stay in the duchy. The Duke looked at her with a smile and told her not to worry, since he would not ask for anything in return. He looked at her and asked if she really didn't need anything. The young lady looked at him confusedly and said that she didn't need anything, and also thanked him for his concern. He looked at her and said with a smile that he was very sorry, but she could think well since she had a lot of time, and she could decide what she needed, while he looked at her with an insidious smile and called her dear. The young lady was shocked. She looked at him and asked what was the matter and how long would he call her that. The Duke looked at her and said that earlier she had shouted that her name was Alice Deeroth, and as a husband, he was obliged to call her dear. The young lady was embarrassed. She said that they were not a real couple, and that was too much. He looked at her and said with a smile that in that case, he would simply call her Alice. The young lady looked at him in surprise as she realized that he was bolder than she had imagined. He looked at her and asked if she would be okay with him just throwing her out with her family. He asked if maybe he should deal with the Count. The young lady was shocked. She looked at him and said that this was enough. The Duke agreed with her. The young lady smiled and said that in that case she would go and rest. The Duke took her hand and kissed it tenderly. He looked intently at his wife. The young lady looked at her husband in confusion. She did not expect him to do something like that. A moment later, he said with a smile that she should take care of herself. Alice looked at him in surprise and dumbfounded, and in a trembling voice said that he should also take care of himself. She slowly ran away from him. The Duke looked intently after his wife. A moment later, the butler approached him and told him that he had carried out his orders. The butler looked at the Duke in surprise and called him. He, in turn, looked intently at the hand and did not answer anything. He noticed that Alice's warmth was still on his fingertips. He knew that she was simply pretending that she didn't care, but still she was willing to do it dear. The Duke looked at the butler and told him to tell the chef to prepare a wonderful dinner for the Duchess, including her favorite desserts, and also find out what order of knighthood her family belonged to. The Duke he wanted to relieve her of this burden. The butler looked at the Duke in surprise and asked if he could ask him a few questions. The butler looked at the Duke and asked if he accidentally had loving feelings for the lady. The Duke froze for a moment at such a question. The butler looked at the gentleman and said that judging by the way he treated the lady, he seemed to have some feelings for her. The Duke looked at the butler in surprise and asked if he really wanted to say that he had fallen in love with the Duchess. The Duke asked if he is the one who will experience similar feelings. He knew his mother's life was ruined because of love. His father ruined the lives of everyone who fell in love with him. There were even those who were ready to risk their lives for the sake of this love. He knew that such a merciful and honorable feeling was terrible. So the Duke made a promise to himself that he would never love anyone. He could not believe that he could fall in love. He looked at the butler and told her with a smile that Alice was just his savior, and there would be nothing wrong if he was kind to her, since she saved his life. The butler asked for forgiveness from him because he said too much. The Duke was in shock and did not understand why part of his heart was beating so anxiously. He felt as if this feeling was for someone special, and it was his first time. He knew that, to be more precise, it was more likely the feeling that he would lose his consort's divine powers. At noon the next day, Madame learned that the Duke had gone to see the Emperor. She was furious. The maid looked at Madame and said that he had gone to the Imperial palace before Madame woke up. Madame furiously threw everything she saw. She looked at the maid and angrily asked why she was only telling her about this now. She fell to her knees and asked Madame for forgiveness. Since she was wrong, she asked Madame to have pity on Days. Madame looked at the maid grayly and said that she told her to keep an eye on the Duke and the butler, and now everyone will know that he has woken up. Madame was furious, and since the Duke kicked the Count out of the estate and the plan for Alice was thwarted, Madame understood that if things continued like this, she would lose everything she had. The maid looked at Madame and called her Madame Puzzled and furiously asked what happened. The head maid said that they still had an ace up their sleeve and asked if she had forgotten about it. Alice looked at the maid in surprise and asked if the Duke had really gone to the Imperial palace. The maid smiled and said that it was so, and she heard about it early in the morning. She said that all the maids in the estate were whispering that the Duke had gone to the Emperor, and it was a matter of time before the Duke regained his strength. Alice looked at her, and she said it was true. The maid was very excited, because since she knew that the Emperor himself was having a difficult time with their Duke, and she knew that the family's power was simply incredible. Alice looked at the maid in surprise and asked why the Emperor was having a hard time with the Duke. She didn't know this, since nothing was written about it in the novel. Alice wondered if he had a power that even the Emperor himself couldn't handle. She wondered if he could handle the darkness. She understood that if he coped with everything, then she could live comfortably like a priest. She wondered if the Duke didn't know about the darkness, if so then she would die before he defeated the darkness. Alice knew that the main character of the novel would find out who the darkness is at the very last moment of his life, so it would be safer for her to live in the temple. The maid looked at the Duchess in surprise and asked if she was feeling bad. The young lady looked at the maid and said with a smile that she was fine. The maid was puzzled as she saw that the lady's face had turned pale. The maid looked at the lady and told her to soon finish the dessert that the Duke had sent her. The young lady looked at her in surprise and asked again who sent the dessert. The maid said that the Duke ordered desserts to be prepared for the lady. She said that he must have noticed that she was in a bad mood after yesterday. She looked at the dessert in surprise as somehow her eating had improved. To be honest, she was very glad that he had helped her in the past. The young lady was shocked. She didn't want him to lure her with his beautiful face. The Duchess looked at the maid and said that she would like to rest a little and be alone. The maid said with a smile that in that case she would leave her and left. The doctor bowed to the Duke and said that they had arrived at the palace. The Duke looked at the palace as he was a little surprised. The beautiful view of the palace still impressed him. The Duke looked at the doctor and told him to wait here for now. The doctor smiled and said that he would do everything. The Duke slowly came to the palace for an audience with the Emperor. The Duke looked at the Emperor and bowing greeted him. The operator looked at the Duke angrily and told him to stop. The Emperor said that he was very glad that he was in perfect health. The Duke glared at the Emperor, as he knew this was a complete lie. The man approached the Emperor and quietly said that the news that the Duke had woken up had already spread throughout the empire. The Duke saw the Emperor's closest assistant. It was a flatterer who blinded the Emperor and did not allow him to hear other people. The Duke understood that with someone like him, the Emperor had long ago stopped seeing everything with his own eyes. The Duke said with a smile that everything was thanks to the Emperor's faith. The Duke looked at the Emperor and said with a smile that, thanks to his consent to be married against the laws, he managed to wake up from the Duchess's prayer. The Emperor was shocked by such a statement. The Duke knew that it was not just about marriage, but that the Duke's house was unattended. The Duke knew that by watching Madame the Emperor had taken control of the duchy. The Duke knew that the Emperor must be afraid that he would covet his power, and the Emperor would be guarded until he died. He knew that this would not end until he died, or the Emperor was replaced. The Duke looked at the Emperor and said that from now on he would continue to serve him, and asked him to take back the power of his mansion. The Emperor was shocked. He looked at the Duke and asked what he was saying. The Duke looked at the Emperor and said with a smile that he must regain his power over the mansion. The Duke said that he regretted that a lot of work had accumulated in the duchy. The Emperor looked at the Duke and said that this position was controlled by the Marquis, and he could not decide everything like that. But this did not mean that he was not capable of it. The Duke sighed heavily. He saw that the Emperor did not at all look like the man who ruled the empire. The Duke looked at the Emperor and asked, why don't they consider this issue of us becoming vassals? The Emperor smiled and said that that's exactly what they would do. The Duke smiled and said that he would also like to see the first prince. Alice sighed heavily. It was very difficult and painful for her because of the Duke. She was puzzled because it seemed to her that she had overeaten and was throwing up. A moment later, she saw some kind of outbuilding. She was surprised that there was such a place behind the mansion. She was a little alarmed since there was not a soul around, and it was very quiet. Alice understood that she still shouldn't go into such a place. But suddenly she heard some extraneous noise. Looking back, she saw that someone was coming here. Alice looked into the distance in surprise as she saw the maid and realized that it seemed that Maris was wandering away from Madame. Alice knew that if they met, the maid would probably grab her hair. Alice decided to hide anyway. Alice realized that the best option for quickly hiding was the annex near which she stood. Alice, in turn, sat quietly in the annex and watched the maid. She saw that a man had approached the maids. Alice saw that the mistress was not there, and now it would be difficult for her to sneak past them in secret. She looked at the man in surprise as she wondered who this other person was. Maris said that this was a very important task, and he couldn't just fail. Alice noticed that the maid was very nervous. Thomas looked at her and said that if it was so important, then they should go into the annex so that no one would see them. Alice became very nervous because they were going to come to the annex where she was. Maris looked at him and said that the previous duchess died there. She looked at him and asked if he knew how scared she was when she stayed there with her mistress. Maris said, "The maids say it's haunted, and she won't even set foot there." Alice turned around in surprise and looked around the room. She was a little surprised because she heard the maid talking about the previous maid. She wondered if they were talking about the Duke's mother. Thomas looked at the maid and said that they then needed to talk quickly before anyone came and saw them. The maid looked at him and handed him a piece of paper. She said that it said where he needed to go to pick up the medicine that his mistress had entrusted to him. He looked at the contents in surprise leaf and asked if they sold poisons there. He looked at her in surprise and asked if the lady was really going to use poison on the Duke. He said that the Duke woke up and they screwed up, then everyone would die. The maid said that this is not the time to talk nonsense. She looked at him and asked what he would do. When the Duke began to find out information about why he passed out, she told him not to forget that he was the one who poisoned the Duke several times, and he in turn passed out. Maris looked at Tom and said that the Duke can banish the lady and they will die. She looked at him and said that there is only one way to survive, so they need to carry out the lady's plan. He looked at her and asked, puzzled, if the Duke had not been poisoned before. He said that security had been tightened, so it would be difficult for them to use poison again. She told him not to worry about anything, as the doctor would take care of everything else. Tom looked at the maid and agreed with everything. He also asked when he should bring the poison. She looked at him and said that in 2 days he should undergo poison, and in 3 days there would be a memorial service on the day of Mr. Ethelm's visit. Alice was shocked by what she heard. She wondered what she had just heard. The Emperor looked at the Duke with contempt and asked if he really wanted to visit the palace of the first prince. The Duke looked at the Emperor and said that it was so, since he had overcome mortal danger and thought of the first prince who was also chained to the bed. He said that it was a miracle that he woke up, so he would like to see His Highness and share positive energy with him. The Emperor looked angrily at the Duke and said that since he was asking so, he could not refuse. The Duke thanked the Emperor. Walking along the corridor of the palace, the Duke noticed that there were a lot of guards outside, but inside it was gloomy and empty. The Duke thought for a moment, as it looked like the Emperor had abandoned the first prince. Entering the room, the Duke saw the first prince lying quietly on the bed. The servant looked at them, and bowing said that he was leaving, and leaving them alone. The Duke was surprised, as the prince was left unprotected with strangers. The Duke wondered if the subjects had also abandoned the first prince. The Duke looked at the doctor and told him to quickly examine the prince. There were 3 princes in the empire. The first was Crasino van Pentitum, son of the late Empress. Second, Axion Pentium, son of the current Empress. The third prince, born in the servant's bedroom, Alvin Pentium. Among them, the most capable was the first prince. But 2 years ago, he fell into a coma due to poisoning. The second prince is completely different from the current Empress in his tactlessness. In high society, he is known for his debauchery. And about the third, they say that he is a disgrace to the Empress. His face is not even recognizable. The Duke understood that the first prince was needed to begin the struggle for power. Or rather, now that there was no worthy heir, the Duke looked at the prince and asked the doctor what he could say about his condition. The doctor said that it seemed that His Highness had lost consciousness due to the neurotoxin of the Roropo plant, which grows in the royal desert of the western continent. The doctor said that when a person eats it, he goes into coma and he begins to hallucinate. The Duke looked at the doctor in surprise, as he was able to immediately identify the poison, which not only the royal doctors, but also any other doctors of the empire could not identify. The Duke believed that he still did not lie when he said that he was very well versed in poisons. The Duke looked at the doctor and thought that he was very useful. The doctor, in turn, was very frightened and did not understand why the Duke was looking at him so intently. He was scared to death. Helkin looked at the Duke and said that it was true, and he swears that he is not lying. Clylus looked at the doctor in surprise and said that he did not say anything, and he also asked if the doctor could save the prince. The doctor looked at the prince and said that it has been a long time since the prince took the poison, so his organs are already badly damaged. The antidote can only be obtained in the royal desert, and it takes a long time to make it, and during this time his condition may deteriorate greatly. The doctor looked puzzled at the prince and said that if he tried, there was a high probability that he would not wake up. The Duke sighed heavily and said that it seemed that in this way he had little chance of recovery. The Duke understood that it would be very difficult. He understood that the same miracle would not happen to the prince as it happened to him, Clylus. He realized that using divine power was too dangerous for Alice's well-being. The next day, the young lady woke up and was very uneasy. She could not sleep because she was very worried about what had happened. The Duke and lady returned late, so she could not see them. She did not understand where the doctor went since she had not seen him for a long time. Alice understood that of course you would be in danger if she told others about the plan. Alice knew that now was the time when the servants went to breakfast. She could go to the Duke unnoticed. The Duke looked at the young lady in surprise and asked with a smile if she really needed to talk to him. Alice looked at him and asked for forgiveness for coming so early. The Duke smiled and said that there was nothing wrong with it, and he was always ready to receive her. She looked at him and said that first of all, she is in love with the Duke, and she hopes that he understands that she is not doing this to stay in their dukedom, and she is doing this solely for the sake of her conscience. The Duke looked at him in surprise, and said that he would listen to her carefully so that she could speak. She looked at him and said with complete seriousness that Madame was going to poison him again. The Duke looked at her intently but did not answer. A moment later, he looked at her and said he understood. The young lady looked at him in surprise as he reacted too calmly to what she said. Alice was surprised, as she did not expect such a reaction. The Duchess saw that he reacted very calmly to her words. She wondered if he really knew everything and was now going to sit back. She looked at him and said that she had listened to them, and they want to poison the Duke at tomorrow's dinner, and the doctor will have the poison. She looked at him and told him to be confident in her words, since she heard it from the lips of close servants. Madam, she said that the maid's name was Maris, and the servant who went to buy the poison. Thomas looked at her and calmly said that he understood everything. She looked at her in surprise, asked if he didn't believe her. The Duke asked in surprise, why did he suddenly not to believe? He said he believed everything she said. She looked at him in surprise and asked if that was all. The Duke looked at her in surprise and thanked her for the warning. She looked at him and said that this was not something to talk about. She asked if he didn't want to know all the details. He said that he would like to know something. The young lady looked at him intently and said that she would answer his questions. He looked at her intently and asked if she had decided what she wanted. The young lady was taken aback by such a question. She was in shock because she had not slept all night from this anxiety. She was in shock or simply inattentive, but for some reason the feeling of déjà vu did not leave her. The Duke looked at her intently and said that it seemed that she had not yet decided. He looked at her and said that she was quite tired. He asked what had happened to her. The young lady was furious, as she could not sleep due to worry about him. Alice jumped off the chair. In a rage, the Duke looked at her in surprise and called. She looked at him and asked for forgiveness. The Duke looked surprised and asked what she was talking about. She said that she would leave right away and leave him. The Duke looked at her in surprise and asked her to wait since they had not yet finished speaking. The young lady looked at him sideways and said that she could not give him an answer to his question, since all she wanted was to become a priest. The Duke froze in bewilderment, looking after her. He wondered if he really saw that she was irritated. He looked at the butler and told him everything. The Duke, puzzled, said that Alice had never looked at him with such a cold gaze. The butler, in turn, looked intently at the Duke. He did not know what to answer him. Now he understood why the lady was in no mood when he accidentally bumped into her. The butler realized that His Excellency did not understand human feelings at all. The butler looked at the gentleman and said that perhaps this was her reaction to the fact that she was waiting for a reaction on an important issue. The Duke looked at the butler in surprise and said that he already knew everything in advance, and it was he who laid the foundation to reveal the game. Madam, the butler looked at the Duke and said that the lady still does not know the whole situation. She could have thought at that moment that the Duke does not take her words seriously. The Duke was a little puzzled, since he had arranged everything so as not to disturb her in order to prevent this once and for all. However, he did not understand her true intentions and feelings. Slowly, the Duke took the pies and began to write a letter. He asked for forgiveness for his unscrupulous attitude. He wrote that he believed everything she said. He hoped that her discomfort would soon pass. The Duke looked at the butler and told him to hand over the letter to the Duchess, along with her favorite desserts. The butler froze in surprise. He did not expect the gentleman to write a letter like that with an apology. The Duke looked at the butler in surprise and asked why he did not take the letter. The butler was shocked, since he had not seen anything like this in his many years of service. He had previously heard from the Duke that he did not have any feelings for the lady. The butlers looked at the Duke and asked how the trip to the palace went. The Duke said that the trip went nothing, since the doctor said that she was the first prince, there was no hope. The Duke said that he suggested that he continue to examine him, but he still wondered, can he trust such a doctor? The butler told the Duke not to worry about such a thing. The butler said that the doctor had a sick daughter, and also his wife, who was accused of murdering a nobleman. Madame promised to clear his family's name, but still the butler said with annoyance that he did not know if she could even do what she promised. The Duke said that things are different now, and the doctor swore not to participate in the preparation of the poison used on the first prince. The butler said that the doctor really has talent. The Duke said that's why he wants to recruit him into their monster-killing squad. Killing monsters that devastate the entire empire is a very dangerous business, but can be extremely profitable. Their skins, teeth, and magic stones are quite expensive, and to destroy the monsters, you will need paralyzing poison. The poison sold in the market is quite weak and ineffective, but if the doctor creates a paralyzing poison, then they will succeed. And this, in turn, will lead the dukedom to success. When the Duke left the first prince's palace, he accidentally met the Empress. The Empress said with a smile that they had not seen each other for a long time. The Duke knew that it wasn't that important right now, and he needed to focus on his task. The Duke looked at the butler and told him to tell his sister that the designated day was already tomorrow, and everything needed to be prepared. The butler bowed and said that he would do everything. Edom looked at his mother with a smile and said that he missed her very much, and he was very glad that she was okay. He looked at his mother and asked what would happen if she got sick. He asked who could run the mansion, since Alice was in shock. She did not understand why she was in such a place among them. She stared at Madame and wondered what she was up to and why she had invited them to the dinner party. She looked closely at the Duke and realized that he had made it clear that he did not take her words so lightly. She was embarrassed when she read his letter. Alice was very pleased that he apologized to her. She looked at him in surprise as she noticed that he was smiling very brightly. The youth looked at his brother and said that he was in very good health. The Duke looked at him and said that he had heard that he had not come since the Duke fell asleep. The young man looked at his brother and said that he was very busy studying at the academy. Madame said that her son was in his first year at the academy, and he had to study day and night, so he could not visit the Duke's mansion. Claylus looked at them and said with a smile that he understood everything, since these were difficult conditions for the future Duke. He looked at them and told them to accept his congratulations. Alice was in shock and did not understand what was happening. Sienna looked at the Duchess and asked if she was feeling unwell. Madame said with rage that it was very frivolous of her to sit alone with such a mean on this beautiful day. Alice smiled and told the lady that she was fine. The young man looked closely at his mother as he noticed that she was very angry. The young man looked at his daughter-in-law and said with a smile that he had not yet greeted her, and he had heard from his mother that she had made a fuss about wanting to become a priest. The maid slowly carried all the prepared hotels into the living room. The doctor came closer to her and looked at her intently. She looked at him and said they were desserts for dinner. Maris hurried him because they could be seen. The doctor looked closely at the poison he held in his hand. Everyone sat at the table and waited for desserts. The young lady looked at the young man and asked why she should make a fuss. Alice looked at him and said that she knew that everyone was surprised by her divine power, but he should be glad that the Duke woke up thanks to her prayer. She looked at him and said with a smile that, moreover, the day the Duke woke up was very important. With tears in her eyes, she looked at him and said that perhaps she was not to his liking. Sienna sighed heavily and said that this is his attitude towards the man who saved the Duke's life. She said that now she can hardly believe that he is glad that the Duke woke up. The young man looked at them and said that he did not mean that he understood that in any case she was just bought by the lady his mother and that she was just a fake. He hoped that his brother would be on his side. The Duke looked at his brother angrily and said that first of all she was his wife and then his savior, so he needed to be more polite to her. The young man was furious at his brother's words. A moment later, looking at his brother, he said that he understood him. Madame looked at them and said that since Ethel had arrived, she prepared dessert for the occasion. A moment later she called for dessert. With a smile she said that she had prepared it herself. The young people sitting at the table became wary as they realized that there would be poison in the dessert. The young lady signaled to her husband, but he ignored her. She was in shock. The servants slowly served dessert and tea to the Duke. Ethel looked intently at his brother, with a smirk on his face. Madame told the Duke that the dessert was good for health. The Duke, in turn, said that he did not know that she would care so much about him. Madame was very glad that he fell for her trick, since he could not imagine that there would be poison in the dessert. Alice was shocked. She realized that she needed to stop him. With lightning speed, she rose from her chair. The Duke slowly pulled the fork with dessert to his mouth. But a moment later, the doctor burst into the living room and told the Duke not to eat dessert. Alice was shocked because she saw the doctor. She didn't understand why he came and what was going on. Helkin fell to his knees and told the Duke not to eat the dessert as he was poisoned. The Duke looked at the doctor in surprise and asked if he was poisoned. The doctor looked at the Duke and said that the dessert was poisoned the way he personally poisoned it. He said that he could not let him die, and the doctor also asked the Duke for forgiveness. Madame said with rage that she had never met such a dangerous person who would add poison. Madame looked at the servants and told them to come over. The servants in turn whispered to each other because they did not know what was going on. The Duke looked at everyone present in surprise and asked if everything the doctor said was true. Madame angrily said that he was just talking nonsense. The Duke looked at her and asked if it was possible that one person had planned this. The Duke said that he needed to know who was behind this. The Duke looked at the doctor and told him to immediately name the criminal. The doctor looked at Madame and said with rage that everything was planned by her. Madame froze in shock. She was angry and screaming. She did not understand how the doctor could accuse her of such a thing. The doctor said that he was not lying, and he had evidence. A moment later, the doctor provided evidence in which it was clearly audible what Madame was saying. Alice was shocked because from the dialogue, she realized that it was Madame's voice. The doctor looked at Madame with rage and shouted that all this was planned by her, and he has letters where Madame asked to prepare poison. He said that if you compare the handwriting, the proof will be obvious. Madame grabbed the knife in rage. She could not understand how he dared accuse her and screamed with rage that she would immediately kill him. Madame rushed at the doctor with a knife in her hands, but the Duke stopped her in time. He took the knife and pushed her. Madame fell to the ground with a roar. The Duke looked at Madame and said that his body had not yet fully recovered, so he could not control his strength. The Duke came closer to Madame, who in turn looked at him furiously. The Duke looked at her with contempt and asked why she had acted so stupidly. She looked at him in surprise and dumbfounded, and asked if he really knew everything from the very beginning. He looked at her and said that if she had not done this stupid thing, he would have forgiven her, but the lesson did not benefit her, all for the sake of her son and power. The young man ran to his mother and called her. The Duke looked at his knights and called to them. David looked at the Duke and said that he was listening to him carefully. Everyone present was shocked, as they could not believe that the knights had returned. Alice looked in surprise at the leader of the knight squad. The Duke looked at them and said that they wanted to poison him, and he himself would personally interrogate them, but for now they needed to be thrown into prison. David bowed and said that he would immediately carry out his order. David looked at his knights and told them to immediately take them to prison. A moment later, they saw an incomprehensible sight. A moment later, the Imperial knights entered the room. The head of the knights looked at them and said with a smile that by order of His Majesty, they had come to pick up the criminals. Alice was shocked because she did not expect to see this man. Cases Whiston, head of the Knights of the Imperial Palace, the strongest man in the entire novel. Anyone who stands in his way will be pulverized. He is a very cruel person. In the original, he appeared next to Madame at the moment of the destruction of the duchy. The Duke looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. The head of the knights said that this was the order of His Majesty the Emperor, and they needed to arrest Madame and Master. David was shocked. He could not understand how this was possible. He said that these two wanted to poison His Excellency. The Duke looked at his knight and told him to calm down. He also looked at the Imperial knight and asked what the criminals were accused of. The head of the knights said that they were accused of forging documents for admission to the academy, bribery, and fraud. Since the honor of the academy was at stake, the Emperor ordered a thorough investigation. He looked at the Duke and said that therefore the Duke's family had no right to decide the fate of these two. While the investigation was underway, also His Majesty issued a decree that he could not protect these two. The Duke looked at him and asked if this meant that these two would fall under their supervision. He said that it was very scary that the case of bribery and fraud had only now come to light. The knight looked at the Duke and said that he was simply following the orders of the Emperor. The Duke looked at the knight in surprise and said that he did not know that the Emperor was so interested in what was happening at the academy. The head of the knights looked at Alice in surprise. He looked at her intently for some time. Looking at her with a grin, he said that it looked like he had met the Duchess from rumors. The young lady looking at him was trembling with fear. She was in shock and wondered if he really knew her. He was the one she didn't want to meet. The Duke looked at him and said that he did not know that there were rumors about his wife. The head of the knights said that since the wedding of the most famous Duke took place in such a hurry, many people are whispering about this topic and discussing future duchesses. The Duke looked at him and said that he was surprised that he was interested in such gossip. The knight said that he was not that interested, just curious. He apologized if he offended him with his words. The Duke looked at him and said that tomorrow he would certainly meet with the Emperor himself and discuss everything with him personally. The knight agreed with him and said that in that case they would leave. The Duke looked at his wife and asked if she was okay, as he noticed that she had turned pale. Alice was in shock, since Cassis said that he was not interested, but he was very curious about her. The Duke thought that the Emperor was Mr. Hassisa, but there was someone pulling the strings. She didn't know whether to tell her about it. She knew the plot from the book, but he wouldn't listen to her. She understood that he could accuse her of madness. He was confused by her, but she did not answer, looking at everyone present. He said that nothing was helping and that she needed to call a doctor. She looked at him and said that she was fine. She was just a little surprised. Teschern burst into the room and called the Duke. Alice looked closely at the young guest who came. She knew that this was the Duke's assistant, and he was a very capable fellow, and knew that although he was a commoner, he was a key character who would help Lady Sienna in the future. She was surprised that the Duke has already found everyone. She knew that there were 2 days left before the meeting with the priest. She knew that he had gained great power, but still wondered if this meant that he would let her go. Alice looked at the Duke and said that she would come to her senses, since she would just rest and they could discuss everything for now. The Duke said that if she felt unwell, she should definitely inform the butler about it. The young lady slowly returned to her chambers. The Duke thought for a moment, as his wife said that she was simply surprised, but it was like fright, and he did not know why she was so frightened. The young man looked at the Duke and called him. He said that he learned that the Imperial Knights also visited the Marquis, who was taking bribes from the madam. He said that the Emperor already knew that they had started the course of the game, and therefore made the first move. Teschern said that if everything is left like this, the Emperor will not begin an investigation, and the court will impose a light punishment on Madame. The Duke said that since this was an order from the Emperor himself, their hands were tied. He wondered if it might be worth using tomorrow's trip to the Emperor. The young man looked at the Duke and said that no matter how hard they tried, they would not be able to take the criminals from the clutches of the Emperor. The Duke was furious and since he knew that these were criminals who were trying to kill the Duke, and it was clearly stated in the law that attempted murder can be punished without trial. But the more the Duke thought about everything, the stranger, everything stopped. The Duke wondered if the Emperor was really the head of this plan. He knew that the Emperor was not that smart. The Duke knew that there was no one from the Emperor's entourage who could make such a plan. The Duke thought for a moment, as he realized that there was still one person who could do this, and that was the Empress. She is impeccable enough to be called great in the corruption of the Imperial family. It is a contradiction of the Council that thinks of her this way. A bright spot in the history of the Empire, a woman so ideal that it raises doubts. The Duke thought for a moment, since the Empress has no motive to do such a thing. The Empress despised the Emperor and the Marquis. Moreover, she never dealt with political issues or dealt with the corruption of the empire. He thought about it and remembered that not long ago, he ran into her at the palace of the first prince. The Empress looked at the Duke and said with a smile that she was very glad that he woke up and was in good health. She looked at him and said that she heard that he was in audience with the Emperor. She said that she knew that he was upset, that they could not help the Duke while he was sleeping. She knows that the Emperor is wrong, but she managed to convince him. The Duke looked at her in surprise, but did not answer. The Empress said that she was very sorry. The Duke looked at her intently and said that she did not need to apologize for that. She said with a smile that the Duke had woken up, and that was very good. She said that she would ask the Emperor so that this would not happen again, just such a marriage as his. At that moment he did not understand many things. Firstly, the mentioned marriage, he wondered what it was and what was the meaning of it. The young man looked at the Duke and asked what he was thinking about. The Duke understood that for now they had no evidence, and they could only wait. The Duke looked at him and said that he had not thought about anything important, and tomorrow they needed to go to the Emperor at dawn, since they needed to resolve this issue as soon as possible. The Duke rode in the carriage and thought about everything that had happened. He knew that with so much evidence, even emperors would have betrayed the criminals. He was very puzzled, since the Emperor had become interested in his wife, and the Empress also asked him for forgiveness, and said that the accidental marriage would not happen again. The Duke looked at the Empress and said that he should not ask her for forgiveness, since he was sorry, but he would never divorce their Duchess. The Empress looked at him in surprise, and with a smile said that he was amazing, since she believed that he would immediately will ask for a divorce. Contrary to the rumors, the Duchess seems to be a good person. The Empress said with a smile that she would like to meet the Duchess. The Duke was surprised, since the Empress was the one who was not interested in the rumors. She showed interest in Alice. He understood that after meeting the Emperor, it was worth meeting with Empress. The butler looked at the young lady and asked if she really wanted to go to the temple. Alice said she was very worried and would like to pray a little. Of course, she knew that was a lie. She wanted to ask Prion for forgiveness today, to take steps to register her as a priest. And when the Duke arrived, she already wanted to be a priest. She knew that even if it looked like cowardice, there was nothing she could do about it, even considering that she had saved him from sleep. She was worried that Casas appeared before the start of the original story. She understood that all the characters in the original were going together because she changed the plot. Of course she did her job, but still she made global adjustments to the plot of the novel. But still, she was very worried, and worried that the Duke had not fully recovered. But still Alice knew that even if she became a priest, she could use divine power and help him. She understood that now was the time to make her legs, until the Duke is not there. The maid came to the Duchess and called her. Alice looked at her in surprise and asked what happened. The maid said that a guest had arrived from the Imperial palace. Alice slowly walked to greet the guest, who arrived at their estate. The Countess greeted the Duchess with a smile. She said that she was the senior maid of the Empress's palace. Alice was very surprised and wary, but still she greeted the head maid. The maid said with a smile that Her Majesty the Empress wishes to meet the Duchess. The young lady was shocked. She did not expect that the Empress herself would want to meet her. The maid said that the Empress sent her to fetch the Duchess. The maid said with a smile that the Empress was waiting for her. Alice was very strong wary, but still she understood that this was the order of Her Majesty the Empress, but she could not understand what was hidden behind these words of the young lady. The Empress greeted the Duchess with a smile and said that she was very glad to meet her. The Duchess smiled and thanked the Empress for the invitation. She is truly a woman of graceful beauty, who is called a bright lily. Despite any obstacles, she does not lose her charm. She was very similar to Sienna, who is like a rose. Alice looked at the Empress in surprise, as she was much more beautiful than described in the novel. But still, she knew that this beauty is not so simple, because she is the very darkness of the story of the novel. The Empress, using her beauty, controls several lovers. She uses them as pawns on a game board. Cassis, whom she saw last night, is also the Empress's secret lover. She killed many people in order to put her son on the throne. The first to fall at the hands of the Empress was the first prince. The Duke came next, declaring that he would not support the second prince. After this, everyone who supported the third prince was erased into dust, and Melton's comrades were killed. But everything was not for the sake of his son. The true goal of everything was to put his son on the throne and rule the empire herself. The young lady understood that if she did something wrong, she would definitely lose her head. The Empress looked at her and said with a smile that she was very beautiful. Alice said with a smile that her beauty was incomparable to that of the Empress. The Empress looked at her and said that she was a very sweet and kind lady, as she even saved the life of the Duke. Alice was shocked because she realized that the rumors had reached the Empress. She said that it was all thanks to God, who heard her prayer. The Empress looked at her and asked if the Duke didn't wake up thanks to her divine power. Alice was shocked because she did not expect such a question. She looked at the Empress in surprise and asked what she was talking about. The Empress said that the Duke slept for 6 whole months, suddenly woke up, and later in the temple, she heard quite funny news. The Empress said that she heard the news that the Duchess wants to become a priest, and she also has divine power. The Empress said with a smile that everything seemed to be thanks to her divine power. A miracle accomplished through prayer. The Empress asked if this did not sound plausible. The Duchess told the Empress that it was true that she had divine power, but she was not able to save people. Alice looked at the Empress and asked if only Dad was not capable of this. The Empress said that she was confused at first, but the Duchess still saved the Duke. The Empress said that she was still Madame's daughter-in-law, and she couldn't protect her when the Duke went crazy. The Empress said that she also cannot ignore the power she has. The young lady looked at the Empress and asked why she called her. The Empress said that she would like to help her become a priest as soon as possible. The young lady looked at her in surprise and asked what she should give in return for the Empress's help. The Empress smiled and said, looking at the Duchess, that she was very perceptive and she liked it very much. The Empress looked at Alice and said that she would like her to become the next pope, since she believes in her and can help. The Empress looked at her and said that she was asking her to become the pope and support the second prince as the next heir to the throne. The young lady froze in bewilderment. She was dumbfounded by this proposal and could not answer anything. She looked at the Empress in surprise and asked what she was talking about. The Emperor sat and carefully examined all the documents that the Duke provided him. A moment later, he said that he couldn't help it when the Duke did anything. The Emperor said that tomorrow he would send the criminals to the duchy. The Duke would also like to tell the Emperor to stop being interested in his wife. The Duke looked at the Emperor and said that he wanted to tell him something. The Emperor looked at the Duke in surprise. The Emperor looked at the Duke and asked if he didn't say it was a cure. The Emperor said he hoped he took good care of it. The Duke looked at the Emperor in surprise and wondered if he was not interested in Alice. The Duke, walking along the corridor, thought about everything. He wondered who the person was who was so interested in his wife, since it was not the Emperor. The butler ran up to the Duke and called him in a hurry. The Duke looked at his friend in surprise and asked what had happened. The butler said that His Majesty the Empress met with the lady, and he was very worried and did not know what to do, so he immediately went to the Duke. The Duke looked at him in surprise and asked what he was talking about. The young lady looked at the Empress in surprise and asked if she really wanted her to become the Pope. The Empress said with a smile that everything was right. The Empress asked if the Pope is not the one who has more blessings from God. Divine power which becomes the measure. The face said with a smile that since she had enough divine power to save a dying man, then she was worthy of becoming a dad. The young lady was shocked because she understood what the Empress was talking about. The Pentium Empire worships the god Helios as the state religion, but the temple and the Imperial family are two factions. The Imperial family does not have the right to appoint a new pope. This decision remains with the temple, and the Pope also does not have the right to delve into the struggle for power in the Imperial family. Alice understood that the Empress made a statement in reproach to the law and order of the world. Alice understood that first of all, she just wanted to become a priest, and could not stop Prion from taking his place. And if there is someone in the temple who stands on the side of the Empress, then she will subjugate all power to herself. Alice understood that the Empress must have a person, and he must not just be a low-ranking priest. Alice understood that if the Empress made her dad, and in the shortest possible time, then she would become a pawn on the board of war. Alice understood that in this case, she could say goodbye to their wonderful, comfortable life. She could not afford to live such a life. Alice understood that if the Empress found out about her plan, she would not let her just live in peace. Alice was scared and did not know what to do now. But a moment later, they heard some noise. The Duke burst into their tea party, and the servants tried to stop him, but everything was fair. Alice was surprised that she now saw her husband. The maids stood across and asked the Duke what kind of stupidity he was allowing himself to do. The maids were furious that he entered Her Majesty's garden without permission. The Duke looked at them and offered his deepest apologies. The Duke said that he was very persistent and committed an extremely negative stupidity. The Duke said that the Empress suddenly called his wife, and her knights persistently refused to let him into the garden, and he was only worried about his wife, so he simply had no choice. The Duke looked at the Empress and said that however he understands that his rudeness is not forgiven, and he will accept the punishment. The Empress, in turn, looked at him intently with a smile on her face. The maids were shocked and did not understand how this could even happen. The Empress looked at them and told them to calm down and let the Duke come to her. The Empress said about asking the Duke to raise his head, since she did not intend to punish him at all. The Duke thanked her for such generosity. Alice looked at the Duke in bewilderment. A moment later, the Duke came closer to her and asked if she was okay. He took her hand tenderly. Alice looked at her husband in confusion. The Duke looked at his wife and said that she was kind-heartedly pleased and must be very frightened. He looked at her intently and said that her face turned pale. The young lady was shocked, as she understood that he was just taking advantage of the moment to touch her. She looked at him puzzled, and in a trembling voice said that she just didn't sleep well. She was very surprised as he tenderly held her hand. She still knew that she could allow him to do this now, since she wanted to leave such a place as soon as possible. She looked at her husband and said with a smile that she was a little surprised, but now everything is fine. The Empress said with a smile that this was the first time she had seen the Duke show fearlessness. She must have surprised him greatly. The Duke looked at her and said that if they had finished talking, then he asked to forgive them, but his wife had a bad complexion, and therefore they would like to leave her. Alice was very happy since they had a good chance to leave here. Alice looked at the Empress and bowing said that with that they would take their leave. The Empress said that she enjoyed their conversation very much, and she also asked the young lady to think about her proposal. The Empress smiled and said that she would like to meet with the Duchess again. Alice understood that the Empress would not give her time to think. Alice bowed to the Empress and said that she did not think that she was so outstanding that the Empress would pay her attention to her. Alice said in a trembling voice that she was very sorry that she could not meet her again, Alice asked the Empress for forgiveness. The Duke looked at his wife in shock as he saw that her hands were shaking with fear. A moment later they left the palace. Alice sighed heavily, as she was glad that they had left such a place and she was alive. The Duke looked at his wife and asked what exactly the Empress had told her. The Duke said that her face was paler than pale, and he could not say that nothing had happened. The young lady looked at her husband in surprise, as she noticed that he was worried about her, but still she could not say what she and the Empress were talking about, since the Empress told her to become a pope and support the second prince. Alice knew that there was not a single witness that the Empress had made such a statement, because of which she could lose her head. In the image of the Empress, no one would listen to her, and she would be trapped. The young lady looked at her husband and asked if he would listen to her. The Duke looked at her and said that he would certainly listen to everything she had to say. Alice looked at him and asked if he could send her to a separate corner far from the capital. The Duke looked at his wife in surprise and dumbfounded. He looked away in surprise and asked what was the reason for the decision to leave the capital. The young lady was very excited, and she couldn't say it out loud, but she still wanted to escape from the Empress. She looked at him puzzled, but said that she wanted to rest a little. She asked him to finish the conversation later. The Duke agreed. They slowly walked towards the exit. The young lady looked at the butler in surprise. She understood that if the Duke and the butler together meant the butler, he told the Duke where she was. She thanked the butler for his concern with a smile. The Duke looked at her and offered her his hand with a smile. He said that he would like to return home as soon as possible. She looked at him in surprise, since she was the one who wanted with every fiber of her soul to escape from home. And today, the desire became even stronger. She looked at him with a smile and said that they were returning home. Alice looked at the Duke and said that she would rise first. The Duke looked at her with a smile and told her to go and rest. Alice was puzzled because she understood that the Empress would contact her again anyway. Alice understood that she needed to rest and think everything over. The Duke was puzzled. He did not understand what the Empress wanted to do. The Duke understood that a stupid emperor cannot be behind everything, which means the person whom Cassis called master is the Empress herself. The Duke understood that he needed to find out as much as possible about the Empress, but still he wondered why about him. My wife was so scared. He understood that her family lived outside the capital, since Alice did not make her debut into the world. No one knows her existence except the Imperial family. Even when she was angry with Madame, she expressed all her emotions. He wondered what exactly they told her, which is why she was so scared. The Duke wanted to ask her everything immediately, but he was afraid that if he took the wrong step, she would get scared and run away. Even if it concerned Alice, he was very careful. The Duke looked at his friend and said that he needed to find out more about the Empress. The young man looked at him in surprise and asked if he really wanted to find out all the information about the Empress. The Duke said that this is exactly how he needs to find out who she meets with most often in Ethan. The Duke said that he needs to find out all the information about her. The young man looked at the gentleman and said that he understood everything. Alice lay down in bed and sighed heavily. She thought she fell asleep while she was resting. She looked out the window and noticed that it was almost dawn. She knew she couldn't just sit around doing nothing. The young lady took a pen and paper. Alice knew that early morning was the perfect time to get her thoughts in order. If she organizes this, maybe she will have a chance. She wrote down her thoughts and everything that happened. She knew that the Duke had woken up. Madame is behind bars, and the Empress, the darkest person in the empire, extended her hand to her, but she refused her. Alice sighed heavily because after writing down her thoughts, hope left her. Now the temple, which was her straw, collapsed before her eyes. Alice understood that there was only one place where the Empress could not do anything, and this was the Duke's house itself. More precisely, if she had been constantly next to her husband, the Empress would not have dared to touch her. The young lady sighed heavily as she realized that, in the end, they had a common destiny. She said with a smile that in this case she could do so, that the Duke would not die, and at the same time save her own life. She understood that she needed to work hard to cure the Duke as soon as possible and kill the Empress together. The young lady was in shock. She still didn't know how to tell the Duke that the Empress was a dark horse. She knew that it was in the second tom that the essence of the Empress was revealed. In the original story, when the third prince and Sienna returned from their hard work and defeating the monsters, the Empress became worried and tried to kill the third prince. At the time of the Empress's order, Cassis was on a campaign with everyone and could have killed the prince without leaving a trace. But everyone learned that the Empress was the key figure in all the villains. Alice knew that this was still very far away. Among the atrocities of the Empress, the closest death of Lady Rosetta. During the Imperial hunt, an accident occurred, as a result of which the Viscountess would die. But then the court will find out that this is the work of the Empress herself. In the original story, the main characters were not present during the Imperial hunt. All this was mentioned in the newspapers that Madame Killian read. Alice knew that this time, if the Duke took part and witnessed the crime, then they would have a card in their hands against the Empress. She thought that since she had dealt with all the difficulties, she had hope. A moment later, she heard some noise. She looked at the lamp and thought that the energy had run out, but suddenly she heard a distinct noise. The young lady sat down on the ground, as she was very scared. She saw that someone was now standing on the terrace and noticed a knife in the man's hands. She wondered if this was the assassin sent by the Empress to finish her off now. The young lady was shocked, since they had only met today. She wondered if she was aiming to kill her. Alice cried, deep in her heart, in such pain. She didn't know if she could defeat him alone, but she still knew that as soon as he stuck the knife into the bed, she would immediately run away. A moment later, the killer stuck a knife into the bed, and she ran as fast as she could. The mercenary was shocked that he lost her. The young lady was shocked, as she did not have time to reach the door. Alice was scared because she noticed that there was a second mercenary behind the door. The man looked at her with rage and asked where she was going. The man said that she shouldn't resist, and it was all useless, so she just had to die slowly. The young lady was very scared and worried. She didn't know what to do. Alice screamed with rage and asked for help. The man ran after her and shouted at her to shut her mouth. A moment later, he struck her. She screamed because she was very scared, but fortunately for her, he missed. The young lady was very frightened and did not know what to do. Suddenly, she looked and saw a vase on the table. Alice grabbed everything she could get her hands on and threw it at him. She screamed at him not to come near, since she had no intention of dying now. The mercenary was shocked. He looked at the young lady and told her to stop. He was furious because she couldn't even die quietly. Unexpectedly for him, Alice furiously threw a vase of flowers at him. The young lady was very frightened. She turned around and saw that there was nothing else on the table, and she could not defend herself in any way. The man sighed heavily. He looked at her with fury and said that she would not live after what she had done. Alice was shocked as she realized that she had only managed to anger him. She told herself to think and not give up, since she understood that she just needed to hold out until the guards arrived. A moment later, she remembered that she had divine power and could attack with it. She prayed to God to lend her some of his strength so that she could protect herself. She directed all her power at the man. He was in shock and did not understand that this was happening now, since the light blinded his eyes. The man looked at her in surprise and said that his wound had healed. The young lady was shocked, as this was not what she expected. She was shocked and thought to herself that if she did die, then he would not live. She thought that this god was simply useless. He looked at her son with contempt and said that she would die quietly, like a fool who cured her own enemy. The young lady looked at him in surprise and dumbfounded. She was scared because she didn't know what to do. She understood that he would kill her now. But a moment later, they heard some kind of roar. Turning around, they saw the Duke. The Duke looked at the man with fury and asked how he dared say such a thing. He was furious that the men managed to get into the mansion. The man was shocked because he did not expect to see the Duke himself. The young lady looked at the Duke in fear. A moment later, she pushed the killer and ran up to her husband with the speed of lightning. The Duke looked at his wife and asked if she was okay. The young lady said that everything was fine, but a moment later they heard a roar and looking out the window saw an explosion. The young people were shocked because they did not expect this. The servants ran towards the explosion with the speed of lightning. They shouted that there were thieves in the mansion, and the mansion was on fire. The young lady was shocked because she did not expect that thieves would break into the mansion. She knew that they were murderers. Alice knew that everything was planned in order to disguise it as an accident in time for the thieves to enter. She hid behind her husband. The young lady was shocked as she saw that there were too many killers in the room. The Duke looked at them with contempt and said that the group of rats was quite large. The Duke looked at his wife and told her to close her eyes for a while. The young lady looked at her husband in surprise, but still agreed. A moment later, everyone jumped and began to attack the Duke. The Duke dealt blow after blow and defeated his opponents. The young lady was stunned by what was happening. The whole view made her feel sick. She was trembling with fear. She covered her ears because she couldn't listen to something like that. The room was filled with screaming, and the smell of blood was heard everywhere. The Duke came closer to her and called her. He asked if she was injured. Alice looked at her husband puzzled and frightened and said that she was fine. She saw that he was covered in blood. She came closer to him and said that there was blood on his face. The Duke, looking at her, said that this was not his blood. The young lady was shocked by everything that was happening. Unexpectedly, she became dizzy and fell. The Duke managed to catch her with the speed of lightning. He looked at his wife in a stunned manner. For some time he called her, but she did not answer. A moment later, the guards ran into the room. They asked how much they were worried about the Duchess, if everything was okay with them. David looked at the Duke and said that there were a lot of thieves in the estate. The Duke told David that he left one alive and he needed to take him to prison. He also said that the vow of vacation called Adolphe. Adolphe looked at the young lady and said that this was a herbal tea that would help her calm down and get back to normal. The young lady did not say anything as she was shaking with fear. It was the first time she saw so much blood and many bodies. This time she understood that this world was different from the one where she lived before. She wondered where the Duke was now and whether he had suffered.